Welcome, everybody, to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering diverse and often conflicting schools of thought. Consequently, we are not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. Our speaker today is Dr. Usha, Sista, and her topic is Philosophy of Science, Demystified and De-Sanctified. Usha, over to you.
I've logged in through my phone as well. Can you unmute me on the phone so I can speak there and everyone can hear me well and you can see me here?
Okay, I'll do that. Usha,
Can you hear me now?
yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. So I will go off screen over there and you can see me here. Perfect. Thank you so much. I will start sharing my screen. So the way I've worked through this is about 45 minutes of talk, and then it's open for discussion. Would that work, David?
Yes, that'll be quite great.
Excellent. Let me start sharing. Share. There we go. Great. You should see just the screen, the PowerPoint now.
Yes, we're seeing it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You shouldn't see anything else. Is that correct?
Oh, we've got your little video.
Okay, and that's it. So not talking notes. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, it would be better if if it was larger.
Yeah. I will make it larger. I'll make it. There we go. We're good?
Good. That's terrific.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for the patience. Right. So let's get started. So I want to start with a provocation here. What really science is, who built it, where does it go wrong, etc. And what counts as science? So astrology has data, thousands of years of recorded charts and empirical data about the heavens, about the movements of the stars and everything. Economics, mathematical models that are as elaborate as any physical equations. String theory, prestigious physicists speaking about the nature of the universe, the origins, etc., but really no experimental data. The best you can say about string theory is that it's mathematically consistent. In no other way do we know what it is, right? So what exactly is science? And we want to look at what is how do we demystify it, and then which is basically the schoolroom cartoon of what science is. I saw Stephen's comment in Meetup, so we will look at that too. And then to de-sanctify it. So it's not a practice that's owned by any single culture. The traditional Western schools of science have no unique claim to it, and we will look at it from a slightly non-European historical perspective as well, right? So what I want to say is symbols and metaphors can carry as much scientific rigor as equations and mathematical formulae, right? Now, what philosophy of science actually is? Now, philosophy of science is not philosophers telling scientists how to do their jobs or what they need to think about, etc. It's a set of questions that science itself cannot rigorously answer, simply because these are questions about the tools and frameworks that science uses to answer the questions about the world we live in, about ourselves. So Now, what counts as evidence? So this is about meta science. So the thinking about the thinking. So it's one level up from the lab bench, or the armchair thinkers too. Now, what counts as evidence? What makes something an explanation rather than just a description, right? When is a theory confirmed versus not yet refuted or not yet challenged, right? Is law of nature, is it a decree? Is it a formal statement? Or is it just a compression that explains a series of patterns? What are all these things? These are the questions that come through philosophers, because the evidence, explanations, theories, laws, these are all the tools of science. Questions about these tools, that is the job of the philosophy of science. Now, it is not a critique from outside that is trying to undermine science or the scientific method, which we will get to in a bit. It's science being self-aware of its own limitations. Now, a lot of philosophers of science are scientists themselves. Many early scientists, the foundational scientists, whether it's Descartes or Galileo or whether we've got Newton, they were all philosophers too. So this goes hand in hand anyway. It's only very recently that the split happened, and now the split is actually converging, which is a good thing for both science and philosophy. Let's look at the historical trajectory of science. 4 major moments and movements that knocked out very comfortable assumptions about how science really works. So we'll be looking at 4 key people: Hume, Popper, Kuhn, and Feyerabend. Hume's was the problem of induction. Popper, the very famous falsification. Kuhn's ideas about scientific paradigms, and Feyerabend's anything goes. So what are we going with here? Hume, now his question here is, when you observe the sun rise every day of your life, what exactly allows you to believe that it's going to rise tomorrow? Right? So that is the problem of induction. So based on past evidence, you make a prediction and you induce an evidence based on the pattern so far observable, as opposed to deduction, famously made famous by Sherlock Holmes, etc. Right? Now, that is a claim that you can only trust about the sun that's going to rise tomorrow because it's worked in the past, which is a tautological argument. It is circular. There is no logical guarantee that it's going to happen tomorrow. So what Hume does is he shows that past patterns never logically guarantee the future. It's a leap of faith. Every scientific law rests on this very uncomfortable foundation. Sitting with it, that the whole scientific enterprise has a crack in it right at the base. And we've got to get very comfortable with such cracks as scientists. We don't work with determinations. We work with a lot of chinks in the foundation. Next one, Popper and falsification. Now, his main point was that stop asking science to prove things. Popper's idea was that the job of science is to unprove things, which is a big red flag in today's terms. So for Popper, a theory is scientific only if it forbids something. If there is an observation that can prove it wrong. So the famous example is all swans are white. It takes one swan to prove that all swans are not white, right? So anything that's unfalsifiable is unscientific for Popper. And it became a textbook assumption. I mean, even I was taught that falsifiability is one of the bedrocks of the scientific enterprise. But it doesn't survive contact with actual data or actually how science works. So, for example, when Uranus orbit could not be predicted did not match Newtonian predictions, right? Scientists didn't abandon Newton. What they actually did was find a new planet, Neptune, that actually follows Newtonian mechanics. So Newtonian predictions didn't, it was not auxiliary assumptions absorb the blow. So what we're trying to say here is Popper's idea is a good idealization, but that's not how science really works. Kuhn and his paradigms. Now, his famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, right? He reframed the whole story in a better way. There are long, calm stretches, day-to-day drudge work where you're solving small pieces of the jigsaw puzzle within an accepted framework. And then there is so within a specific paradigm. And then it is punctuated by a revolution of sorts. And they're rare. They're not very common. So you've got Newtonian mechanics to relativity, etc. Now, the unsettling part is they're incommensurable. That was Kuhn's argument in the sense that scientists on either side of the paradigm are speaking completely different languages. So Newtonian language is very different to the relativistic language. And the switch from one language to the other is not necessarily a matter of logic. It's not just a rational discourse based on evidence. It involves aesthetics, sociology. It involves a generational turnover. So it's I think, as Max Planck put it, science advancing one funeral at a time. So what Kuhn did is that scientific paradigms are related to human psychology and politics, what can be done, what's working. So science is not an edifice sitting outside of human lived experience, but very much a part of it and influenced by it. And then we got Feyerabend, where he says anything goes. So his claim is that there is no such thing as a single scientific method, not Popper's falsification. There's no fixed rule book for it that actually can describe how major scientific breakthroughs happen. Galileo broke every rule of the good method, and it still worked. He was still right. So his provocative slogan was that anything goes. There's no single method to explaining every breakthrough, every real breakthrough. And we've got to sit comfortably with all these different claims to understand what the scientific method might actually be. Yep, we've gotten through all of this, Kuhn's and paradigms. Right. Now, the scientific method flowchart, this is the cartoon that we've been fed at school and even at university, that you observe, you hypothesize, you experiment, you conclude based off the experiment and your hypothesis. Now, that's a neat linear process and almost entirely fictional. It doesn't happen that way. No self-respecting scientist today would believe that it happens in exactly that order or in that system, right? Now, science is messy. It's in any direction. It's messy. Observations are messy. Hypotheses are messy. Experiments are absolutely messy. And because the foundation is mess, our conclusions are also quite messy, right? Now, Fleming didn't hypothesize penicillin. It's the famous serendipity experiment. He forgot about it, and he worked it from there, right? Einstein didn't have any data when he proposed the theory of relativity. It was a lot of armchair philosophizing and thought experiments and mathematical consistency. The theory came long before the data. Even now, we're trying to work through some of his theories and prove or disprove or figuring out in which conditions they are true and which not. And modern genomics, on the other hand, we had a lot of data before we could come up with any theory that could give the data a coherent explanation. So we sequenced everything. And even now, we have a lot of data, but we don't know why things work exactly the way they do. We do not have satisfactory explanatory frameworks for genomics because we've got exons, we've got introns and exons. So most of the genetic material is blank space. They don't code for anything. the very, very small percentage of our genome actually codes for proteins, amino acids and proteins that are used to build their bodies. Don't quote me on this, but I'm guessing at least 90% of the DNA is, I can confirm and send the exact number to you, but almost 90% of the DNA is non-coding material. We don't know what it is that they do. There's some theories as to the support evidence that they might provide, but we don't know. The same as there's much more of nothing in the observable universe than there is something. We don't know exactly why. We've got some theories, but we're not sure yet. So it's not a method that makes science trustworthy because there is no specific unified method to science. It is essentially an institution of error correction. Yes, you observe, yes, you hypothesize, yes, you experiment, yes, you conclude, but it is an institution where there's peer review, there's attempt to replication, rival groups trying to catch each other's mistakes, journals that, not as good as we want them to, but they certainly publish both the proven data and the questionable problems within science, right? The successes and the failures. So science's authority comes from its ability to catch its own errors or the attempt to catch its own errors. And that brings us to Feynman and Sagan. Feynman, they're two science popularizers, but then they come to it from slightly different angles. But the foundation of both is that don't fool yourself. So Feynman's doubt turns inward, where he says that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. He calls it the bologna sandwich. So mimicking the form of science without the substance. He was a rigorous critique of the scientific establishment, of the way papers were published, about the peer review mechanisms, because he saw that there was a lot of glorification and sanctification of scientists or laboratories or certain frameworks, paradigms, which all mimicked science, but without any substance, because genuinely, not without trying to prove that you could be wrong. And he de-sanctified science from the inside of the institution. Now, Carl Sagan turned it outward, then he paired it with wonder. So his candle in the dark, skepticism as a protection against superstition and charlatans, but also having awe for the absolute mysteries and wonders of the world we live in, about the universe. Feynman did that too in his lectures. And I was reading. I actually have his Feynman lectures on science, on quantum physics, and every one of them, he's not specifically speaking about quantum physics until a later point. What he's trying to do is get you to question yourself about how you think about quantum physics, about how you bring a sense of awe and wonder. And both the temperaments are required for us to understand how science works and how it works for us. The global roots. Now, there's the Greek natural philosophy, which is the roughly Western line, the Western empirical line of the scientific method that most of us are famous with. Then there's the European stall, then that's preserved and extended, formalized, and then institutionalized, famously starting with the Royal Society. Now, Greek natural philosophy. Now, Aristotle catalogs and starts classifying the natural world through observation. Now, that then stalls in Europe in the medieval period, and then it is extended and expanded by many Islamic scholars with optics and with mathematical structures and everything. And they start testing all the hypotheses. They work on how everything behaves, and they start coding all that data. That knowledge then flows back into Europe, which then was used by Bacon, Galileo earlier, and then Bacon into a specific scientific method And then what happens during the Enlightenment? We've got the institutionalization, Royal Society, peer review, modern apparatus that essentially governs how science is conducted today. The Eastern empirical traditions, on the other hand, are plural. We must note that a lot of the knowledge that um, a lot of the data that the Western empirical tradition used was actually deciphered and observed and codified by the Eastern schools way before they even started asking those questions, right? The Indian Nyaya school, the formal epistemology of valid knowledge, is called pramana. These epistemological tools existed, way before Aristotle, a few centuries before them. Perception, inference, comparison, and testimony, the rigorous evidence logic. Ayurveda, for example, is case-based, it's empirical, it's refined over generations, and it is embedded in a different metaphysical framework, for sure, than a controlled clinical trial, but more and more of scientific evidence is there now that the framework itself is accurate. The data is accurate. And so the current scientific paradigm is playing catch up with a lot of traditional schools of knowledge base. The frameworks, the metaphysical frameworks may vary, but empirically, a lot of them are absolutely sound. Moving to China, it's slightly less oriented towards law-like universal theories and more towards systemic thinking, towards correlative knowledge structures. But even alongside that practice, there was a rigorous empirical and systemic thinking, meticulous record keeping, meticulous observation of data, meticulous checking of patterns across thousands of years. So the data is absolutely rock solid. They're not isolating single variables in a lab, but they were the earliest proponents of what we call systems design now. They are looking at broad patterns across long stretches of times. So these are also equally empirical as much as the Western systems are. Now, several independent traditions develop these systemic and epistemic virtues. The West focused more on universal laws, not outside of the history that they were part of. This is where Kuhn becomes important. Why did certain traditions gravitate towards certain kinds of systems of knowledge and certain specific epistemic frameworks? Because we're not outside of history, and science is certainly not outside of history. The metaphysical frameworks and the governing cultures of the governing thought systems of each culture drives the people within that culture to think and systematize in certain ways. So what we call the scientific method now is really a 17th century invention. It was brought on by colonial power. It was brought on by economic power. It's not the only way that humans have systematically studied nature. The West, it doesn't own scientific rigor. It just won the branding war with the rest of the world. Now, symbolic and metaphorical systems can also be scientific. They are also scientific. Symbolic vocabulary versus epistemic practice, right? Two things. The symbolic vocabulary is a system of knowledge uses. And then it has an epistemic practice underneath it. So you've got this system also counts as a scientific practice because regardless of its vocabulary, regardless of the metaphors it uses to explain phenomenon, right? Because as long as it can make claims that can be tested against outcomes, and if the claims can be revised based on what those outcomes are. Now, equations are one way, one vocabulary for doing this kind of testability and revision. And metaphor and symbol can be other. There's a reason why philosophical and literary and artistic traditions have worked very closely with the empirical and scientific vocabulary for centuries before the European 17th century Western tradition. The Native Americans, especially in the Amazonian regions, they could identify every single plant in their environment. Yes, it was spoken of in metaphorical terms. Yes, there are, flying dragons and, thunder gods and Tasurinchi and other claims to exactly that epistemic and empirical data underneath it. But doesn't mean we can ignore it because the vocabulary is symbolic, because the data is sound. Traditional medicine too. I mean, there is absolutely nothing to say that there are meridians, or even in the Indian traditions, it's called the nadis, the different spiritual point, meridians within the human body through which prana, which is not the air, but it's your life force, what the Chinese call chi, imported from India, actually, the whole thing. But there is no evidence that any of those channels exist. There are, but the outcomes can be measured, at least by the current, the current theories. We may not call them nadis, we call them nerve stimulation. We've got the vagus nerve, we've got cortisol levels, we've got the language that can be tested and proven today. But there are generations of case outcomes, even from the meridians and other traditional medical schools, medicine systems. We can take those exact outcomes, exact patterns, and then study them in modern trials, which is what science is doing now to a large extent, throwing out thousands of years of traditional wisdom simply because it is not written in the same language as the currently accepted scientific vocabulary is dangerous, and it's ultimately self-defeating for all of us. Right. The Aboriginal song lines, right? We've got the seasonal and ecological astronomical knowledge that is encoded in myth and song, not in equations. And they are as good as anything else for us to, if this was the vocabulary available to a certain culture to express their observations of the natural world and their interpretations, we can absolutely take it at face value. And so that it's the testability plus revision that is the scientific practice, not necessarily the symbolic or the mathematical language that it is expressed in. But not everything qualifies. So this is where we'll get to where anything goes in vocabulary that is in your symbolic framework does not mean that everything counts. Some test systems fail the test outright. Let's look at a few examples there. Astrology. So the claim is that planetary positions at birth causally shape personality and life events. First is the mechanism problem. There is no known physical force that scales appropriately at those distances. Now, the gravitational pull of the obstetrician as he yanks a baby out of the womb exceeds the Mars's gravitational pull on Earth. So whatever astrology is picking on, it is not gravity, and no alternative mechanism has been proposed. There was an actual test conducted in 1985 and reported in Nature by Sean Carlson. The professional astrologers were given real birth charts and asked to match each one of them to a correct personality profile. Each profile was generated using standardized psychological testing. Astrologers had predicted beforehand that they'd succeed well above chance. So they made a self-assertive prediction as well. They didn't. The match rate was statistically indistinguishable from random guessing. So the diagnostic tell here is What happens after a failed prediction? A mature scientific practice responds to failure as data. That is also important data. So what you do with it is go back and revise the core claims. Whereas astrologers, when a prediction fails, typically add qualifiers like Mercury was in retrograde or something else was in retrograde. It doesn't make the system more accurate. It's the signature of pseudoscience. So the theory moves in the direction of less falsifiability under pressure, not more precision. All right, another one. Homeopathy, this is one of my favorites actually. Now, the claim is that a substance that's repeatedly diluted retains the therapeutic memory of that substance in water and becomes more potent. The more it's diluted, the more potent it is. So repeated dilution makes it potent, and water remembers what's no longer there. The dilution math here, a common homeopathic preparation, it's got these degrees of 30C, 60C, 200C, etc. What it means is it's been diluted as many times. So 30C has been diluted by a factor of 100 30 times. So 10 to the power of minus 80. So Avogadro's number, which basically is the number of molecules in a standard mole of a substance, is about 10 to the power 23. Now, past this point, essentially 0 molecules of the substance remain. So a 30C dilution is diluted beyond recognition. That dilution factor actually is far more than all the atoms, the estimated number of atoms in the observable universe. This is not very dilute. It's a completely different claim. There is no such thing as structural memory in water. Water doesn't hold memory. There is no chemical signature simply because it's not there at those dilution points. Now, large-scale reviews have been conducted, one of them in the Australia's NHMRC, 176 studies, no reliable benefit over placebo under any condition. So when you go back, similar to astrology, when you go back to the homeopaths and tell them that this is what the data is telling us, they don't go back and make a revision to the original claims. Instead, they assert the tradition. So this is, it's a bologna sandwich. Feynman's test is, cleanly broken. There are questions around placebo over here as to why the benefit, if it offers a placebo benefit, why not just use it? That's okay. You can say that placebo works, but then we should say that it's the placebo that's working and not this particular school of treatment. I'll give you for example. I have a family of, I was going to say psychopaths, I'm sorry, a family of homeopaths. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, my father, they all gave homeopathic medicines. So I grew up in a household of tinctures and materia medica and whatever. And for a common cold, for example, they give you those medications and then say it takes about a week's time for it to work and you got to take it so many times every day. Common cold takes, for most people, it takes about a week anyway to peak and then it recedes on its own. The medication has nothing to do with it whatsoever. It's just going to give you, but human beings do need the sense that they're doing something to deal with the problems they have. So homeopathy or astrology, they are symbolic frameworks. They're like our comfort blankets. We want to feel that we've done something to make ourselves get better or feel better. And homeopathy potentially does that to a certain degree, which is why even the homeopaths wouldn't give you homeopathic medications for anything more complicated than fevers, colds, and things like that. You wouldn't go to a homeopath, or you shouldn't, for a lung disease or any serious medical ailments. You don't go to them. You go to them for an eczema or something like that. It's a comfort blanket. Likewise with astrologers, they're not going to tell you anything about specifics of your life or about how to deal with the problems of your life. They'll give you something that you can hold on to. It's like a nice story that you can hold on to. So as a symbolic, metaphoric framework, as art, as mythology that can help us get through some of the difficult phases of life or the good phases, they're perfectly valid in that sense, but not in any empirical sense. So the summary is that these are all unfalsifiable by design. So, for example, theories that can absorb any possible outcome as confirmation. That was Popper's own favorite, and Freudian psychoanalysis. So, one of the foundational claims, and which is why Freud was debunked quite badly later, was that aggressive behavior confirms Oedipal theory. So, with reinterpretation, as does passive behavior, right? And so with a little bit of interpretation, you can make this particular claim to work with anything. It can absorb every outcome as confirmation. And so by design, it's not something that can be tested. The structural diagnosis, the problem with Popper is that for him, falsifiability was the key to what the scientific method was all about. It's contested, but the structural diagnosis, it's still a very good tool in the toolkit. Some Marxist theories too work in that way. So historical prediction, they can absorb any possible outcome as confirmation. So we've got to be very careful with blanket theories that can accept just about anything as a confirmation of the theory. A good scientific theory will also lay out its limitations. It will lay out its assumptions. Under which conditions can it work? In which conditions can it work with certain provisions? And what are the conditions in which it's not going to work? That brings us back to the error prediction mechanism or error sustenance mechanism within a scientific practice. So then in closing, so why do we trust science at all? Because it is fallible, because it is built to correct itself. It's not beyond question. You don't need to have, well, I would say that you would need to have some faith in it, but that faith comes out of understanding the machinery of science, not because of given wisdom or received coda of why this is the most useful method in all. It's not unique to one culture's toolkit. The epistemic framework is available to all cultures because human beings are scientists. We have needed epistemic and empirical frameworks to survive in the world through our entire history. So it's not just the Western claim to science, it's everyone's claim to science. But yes, that's where for the traditional knowledge systems, yes, they still need to be tested, but we should look behind and beyond the scientific language to see whether it can be tested with scientific rigor. We do not need to throw out traditional wisdom. That would be suicide, as we have recently come to realize. But at the same time, because of its fallibility, this overall scientific structure, the habit, the practice is our best course of action in dealing with the world as we know it and what comes ahead. And to be able to admit we're wrong. Sometimes, science forces you to admit it. And that's why it's both not, there's no place for sanctimonious bullshit in science. And thank you. I will stop here and open up for questions.
Well, thank you, Usha, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Good. Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions, comments, and discussion with Usha, I have a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next Existentialist monthly lecture will take place on Saturday, the 1st of August at this time. And Les Allen, who's with us today, by the way, is speaking on morals, metaphysics, and naturalism. I'll repeat that: morals, metaphysics, and naturalism. Now, the Existentialist Society has weekly meetups at this time from different groups, different topics. So to find out the topics and to get the Zoom details, the best method of which is to get onto the Existentialist Society's meetup page, and there you'll find the topics and the links for the weekly meetups. Now, for our question, comments and discussion session, we will use the raised hand method. And for those who don't know where the raised hand icon is, you'll find it in the React tab at the bottom of your screen. So first cab off the rank is Kerry. Go ahead, Kerry.
All right. Well, thank you very much for a really wonderful, wonderful presentation. I was very, very impressed. I know many scientists and I know many philosophers, and I don't know many, though, who can integrate the philosophy of science as well for a general audience. So that's very appreciated. I may have missed it if somebody covered it, but what is your area of expertise in particular?
First, thank you, Kerry. That's very kind. I'm trained as a scientist. I have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and I've worked in molecular biology before that. But I've also got a rigorous-ish training in philosophy. I work in the areas of systems design. I don't work in the academia. I work as a service designer, as a product designer, etc. So I'm, smack in the midst of the regular world. But yeah. So that's why the combination. And I've been a long time comparative mythologist as well. So I am interested in, systems at odd. I like systems and then I like thinking about how to bring them together. Yep.
Well, if you ever wanted to go into education, I'm sure you'd be quite good at it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you. Remco, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, Usha. And a very good timely topic, seeing that science is under a considerable amount of challenge from different quarters, and a good airing of what science is helpful. To get to the cut to the quick, from where I sit, you left a major chasm unaddressed in science. I'll just be blunt. Yeah, my style. If you look back over time at the ancient Greeks, what they did and their major contribution and their long shadow of the ancient Greeks still hangs around, is that they enabled the recording of what we today call science. So prior to that, prior to the ancient Greeks, say 500 BC or so after, it was word of mouth, and the science, the ancient Greeks developed a method for recording. Now, I use the word recording a lot now.
Yeah.
They enabled the recording of what we today call science. And with the recording, it did something very profound. It standardized the information. It became third person. It's third person information.
Correct.
It was standardized. Variations and observations was discussed and resolved to the best of their abilities. And what we have today, and as a legacy of that, and Newton formulated it beautifully with his Newton's theory. But that is very much a third person science. And I think it's worthy of a whole topic of presentations. I'm mindful of the time and a lot of other people speaking, but I need to say this clearly. you mentioned Thomas Kuhn, but you didn't mention the fact that he dealt very firmly, as did Paul Feyerabend, with the concept of the third person and the first person. Because remember, science begins with a first person hypothesis, first person observation, and it is then translated into a record. But something is always lost in the translation from the first person to the third person. There is a gap. And Thomas Kuhn dealt with it. And he dealt with it at the first person level. Then Paul Feyerabend came in, and as you rightfully said, he was a more anything goes, I think was your words. He also said that the third person is influenced by paradigms and power plays and traditional conceptual ways of looking. So I think if we're going to talk science, and I'll conclude with that, because it needs further unpacking. But if we're going to talk about science, let's be very, very clear that there is a gap between the third person record that we tend to confuse as the truth, that we use and talk about as if it is real, we reify it, is just an approximation that is generally agreed, and we need to get back to the first person, at least recognize and create room for that. And once we start to do that, we begin, and I would suggest, it's not a topic, and I'll conclude with this, we will then begin to see quantum mechanics as a frontier. It is a frontier where the third person and first person hit. They are unable to reconcile because we're talking about a superposition, which is the third person, and then the first person sees a thing, and I think that we need to sort of be clear. Anyway, I'll conclude with that. So the first person is a very important concept, and we need to create room for that. And by that, a lot of the conversations that are going on will resolve, including by Carla Rovelli, by the way. But anyway, I've said too much already. Thanks, Sista.
No, that's all right. Thanks. Good to meet you again, Remco. Yes. Well, I must state here that there's a lot here that are left behind between they're not cracks. These are massive seismic earthquake gaps that I have left. Right? Yes. Well, I briefly mentioned it with, I touched upon it when it comes to how we want to codify observations and all that, but obviously I didn't go deeper into it. Yes. So 2 points there. One is about observing, making a systematic record. So there is systemic thinking, and there is systematizing it into a language, into a vocabulary that can be read by anyone who understands that grammar and comes and arrive at similar conclusions. So which is where you're systematizing. And Aristotle really was one of the first systematizers of his book on natural history was one of the first big attempts. A few centuries before that, you had the systematizing in India when Sushrita and Panini and others were systematizing. 1 second, please. Usha, please take Yuki. She's snapping at me. Sorry about that. That's the dog that wants my attention, so I just need her to get out. Right. So that systematization and recording was happening in different ways in different cultures around the world, no doubt about it. And that's your third person narrative. That's your third person record of what is happening. It's not happening to you, but you're observing it from a distance. And then you have your first person perceptual experience of what you think is happening to you and in the world around you. Right. The reason there is a slight gap between the two is because, and the gap is structural. There's nothing you can really do about that gap, because the first person experience of what you experience is specifically unique to you. Yes, there may be common parameters in there, which is how the entire the psychological enterprise works. Right. Close my door, please. Thank you. Which is why you can come up with medications or with even, diagnostic structures. So that's all based off those patterns. You know that stress affects the human body in certain ways. right? The experience of that stress is not going to be the same from one person to another. How I feel about the particular thing that stresses me is very different. Even if the cortisol levels, the adrenaline levels, and the neurotransmitters all work pretty much in exactly the same way. So yes, there is that difference. Now, where are they converging now to a certain degree? Not everything can converge, but where they are converging where possible is that broadly, you are not outside the universe observing the universe. And that's partly what a lot of quantum mechanics does get to. However, the only caution I would mention is quantum mechanics, just looking at it from a physics and not a metaphysical perspective, and you can look at that, but from a strictly physics perspective, you're talking of scales. Quantum mechanics in physics deals with particles and energies at either infinitesimal scales, I mean, not so much, but very, very small, or some things with absolutely zero mass or very, very low mass, or something that's supermassive. So anything that's within the other observable mass and energy scales still largely follow Newtonian mechanics, which is why you can work out how to drive cars, how to drive planes, how to fly them, when is it going to land, what time. That can still explain. So yes, there is third person, and there is a convergence, but not everything can or will converge simply because of the systems and the way the structure is. Yes, that is an entirely different presentation and talk, and maybe at a later date soon I will give another one. Thank you. I will take that up as my future talk list.
If I could just come back, just say this. It's not to debate the gap. I would suggest the gap is actually widening as we become more sophisticated, is to recognize it. It's just to acknowledge it. And
that there is a gap.
There is such a gap.
Yes.
And we're not able to deal with it by the very mechanism by which we communicate. And that's the important part. And to recognize, and as a concluding point, it is so significant that in 2015, a group of psychologists were profoundly rattled to the core when they found they were not able to replicate very precise psychological tests. And now you could say that's psychology, that's borderline science. I would question that. Anyway, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Remco. Ernest, was it?
Ernest, go ahead.
Thank you, Usha. I enjoyed your presentation, and I agree with you. Science does not know currently everything, but I want to concentrate on what we know now. And my question is, as far as science is concerned, what we know, do we have proven 100%, have 100% knowledge that our solar system is heliocentric, or is it geocentric?
Okay. Yes, it is heliocentric.
So if a person comes to me and says it's geocentric, does he has any chance to prove to me, or even 1% chance to prove to me that it's geocentric?
Not proof in the scientific paradigm, no.
Okay, what about a person comes to me and said that Homo sapiens have been created by a creator?
Yeah.
Has he a chance to prove it to me?
Does he have
science has 100% proven that Homo sapiens have ancestors, Australopithecus or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's a competing people who are claiming that there was a creator. Does he have a chance to prove it to me?
What is the framework that they're using to prove anything to you or to disprove anything?
They claim there is a book written by somebody. And it's in that book, it says God created man and a woman.
Now, are you looking at it So here's the thing. Okay, this is a good question, and it's a very hard one to answer. I can kind of sense where you're going with this, but this is the problem that, to a certain degree, we all face today, right? What do we believe in? Can it be proven in exactly the way that science says something is true? And evolution is the holy grail of that, to a certain degree, right? There is an ethical, a metaphysical belief system that says that we are so and so and so, and there is an empirical, observational, data verified system that we are so and so and so. And what do you believe, right? Now, both of
I
them are
believe in empirical evidence.
right. No, it's not
My
a question
question
to you,
is,
but yes, how do you
science,
prove it? You cannot prove. Okay, here's the long and short of it. Will you be able to prove to someone who is unwilling to accept that there is another paradigm to explain the way things are? Now, if the other person is going to say that there is no other paradigm, there is nothing that you can do to try and convince the other person that it is a valid paradigm of any sort. It's not possible. We're speaking two different languages here, right? Now, should that worry those that have the thinking that, God created them over, we evolved over a period of a few million years, right? Now, if that challenges their version of reality, that they are special, etc., that's going to take them down a very, very difficult path, right? And even the church is now coming to terms with the fact that we may have evolved and the God may have allowed us to evolve in this way. There are arguments coming out of the Vatican to support that now. The bigger question there that I would worry about, to a certain degree, okay, you believe that God created you. I believe that we emerged and never the twain shall meet. Fine, I'm good with that. You can't prove one thing or the other here in any convincing way. You're going to believe what you believe. They're going to believe what they believe. Now, the point then I would take it to is, okay, regardless of how we arrived here, how is it that we are living as human beings in the world with each other, and how are we looking after ourselves and the world we live in? What is our conduct in the world that we live in? So that's a different question, really, but that's the one that they should be more worried about. What is it that your God is telling you to do? What do you think it is? Because it's essentially our interpretation of what is given in various ways. So I wouldn't, these are conversations I have all the time with my family, frankly. Can I prove
Usha,
it to
what I
you?
want, in your personal opinion.
Yeah, my opinion, you can't prove anything here because they're not interested in proof.
So, okay, I understand, but I'm talking about science.
Yeah.
So you're trying to tell me science has not proven that we evolved from Australopithecus?
We have proven it.
100%.
Yes. There's enough evidence.
That's all
Okay.
I want. Yeah.
Yes,
I
we have.
understand that people who do not want to
will
understand
not.
it, they will deny it. I understand.
There's one caveat I would like to mention here. Yes, we have. However, and this goes to slightly science. Yes, there are proofs. Yes, there are laws. Yes, there is, near 100% certainty that this is what it is. But what it does really, leave aside people whether they want to believe in it or not, that's a different thing. But within the scientific paradigm, we are dealing not with a deterministic science. So the way it proves, now, what proof means here, we've got to be very clear about that. Given all the evidence, given all the data, given all the observations, given the geological observations, given the biological observations, given the astronomical observations, everything, this is the framework that most consistently and most persistently explains all the available evidence. So that is the proof. If the proof that you're looking for, or someone's looking for, okay, show me one monkey that has turned into a human being, you're not going to get that. You can show mutations that do change the physical features of people, of other animals over a period of time as an adaptation to a persistent, consistent environment. So that is proof. So we want to be clear about what scientific proof is versus what commonly, and the beautiful thing about science, if convincing data and evidence and frameworks do come that can challenge this, it has to take that into account. So that's where the sanctity model of science doesn't work. There is no sanctimonious bullshit in science. So that's where it is. But thanks. That's my opinion, Ernest. Thank you. Stephen.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Just had a bit of spot of bother there. Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Usha. You're still working on your project of sort of establishing what science is, and I commend you for it. I think there's a lot of detail that goes missing. I mean, there's this sort of proposition that's been there for a little while, that we've now reached the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment entails that all the superstitions of the past are dead, and now we're on a path of endless progress. And historically, I find that just doesn't match. For example, we saw in ancient Egypt a few centuries of progress, or that extended to Sumeria, around the same time that they progressed in various arts that were of tremendous importance. Mm-hmm. And then we had an axial age, which lasted a few centuries. That was famously the time of the Greeks, although much of the Greek knowledge actually came from the Levant, and that gets overlooked.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's a bit of a Middle Ages, and then suddenly in the late Middle Ages, a huge period of progress occurs. And I'm contending that we've come to the end of this cycle of progress, and science isn't going to make too many discoveries in the future. I think science today, the scientific establishment has become a cult. Mm-hmm. It's succumbed to politics. You only have to look at the so-called climate science and its disasterism. It's nothing but a cult. So I wonder what's going to be your opinion of the historical precedents of science. That's one question. Now, there's another point about the scientific method, which is basically analysis. But that is, we have the empirical experience, and then we form an idea of explanation or a proposition. But that proposition is dependent upon the will, not upon reason. Mm-hmm. For example, we could come up with a proposition which is completely illogical, and we have to think, well, is that proposition logical? But that comes after the proposition is created. So right. That's the question. Is science ultimately, so the scientific progress and the method, dependent on volition?
Okay.
Primarily before reason. So those are my two areas of question.
Right. So one is what's the historical trajectory now? Where are we at now? And the second is about the volition before a proposition, before
reason.
Yes, before reason kicks in. Okay.
Precede reason.
Right. Both of them are slightly connected. And I did mention this in the talk as well. Scientific method, or whatever science is as an institution, what it is today, is not outside of the human history. It is formed and it is informed and influenced by every factor and feature that's happening around the world to us at all times. So it's not an entity that is sitting apart from history, observing history and making conclusions about it. So that's one thing. there have always been cycles in science. Whatever, even if we look at, is this the end of all knowledge? I doubt it. It is. We will definitely be going back and revising and relooking at all the information and knowledge and data that we have right now, reinterpreting it, reanalyzing it, retesting our predictions. So this is an endless cycle. As long as humans are around and humans want to seek for explanatory frameworks for their experience and their existence, this is going to go on. And then is there going to be, is it currently under some kind of a power what's the hostage of the political cult institutions and everything? Yes, to a certain degree, yes, it is, which is why there are more and more voices against, which is why I said the moment you sanctify and deify science, you lose it. Science is a tool that we use to understand and live in the world. It is as much a tool as, which is why symbols and metaphors and stories and a placebo, they're all tools. They don't try to explain the world, but science goes one step further and provides an explanatory framework. So it is prey to exactly the same things that any institution is. And will they make important discoveries in the future? I don't know. Maybe they will. I mean, it's very likely that, because that is the whole purpose and pursuit of science. How will it change from political pressure? It's been that way since always, and those cycles will come and go. There will be powers that will try to influence and destabilize scientific results. Happens all the time. My biggest bone of contention is with the American FDA and with the pharmacy world, where, on the basis of very sparse and completely thin evidence, you push out drugs that are used for the opioid crisis, for example. That's an example of politics putting pressure on medicine, on results, on evidence, when you push aside evidence in the name of, greed. So that's where it meets your capitalism and it meets human greed and everything. So yes, these things have been going on forever, Stephen, and they will continue to. There will be checks and balances. There will always be questions. And there will be times when power wins, and then there will be times when power is brought down. There will be growth, and then there will be a rise of power again. So this is history. Volition and proposition. Yes, we make an observation. So what is it separate? So logic will come later. Yes, to a certain degree, yes, provided, unless you've kind of trained yourself to think in logical terms over a period of time. Even then, the propositions that you put forward are always prey to all the fallacies and fallibilities of human beings, which is why that is why we ask for repetition. That is why we ask for independent verification. So the checks and balances are there to exactly try and mitigate the problem that you've raised to a certain degree, right? I'm too close to my own idea to be able to logically defend it and provide it with the rigor that it merits and it, requires. Which is what Feynman said. You're the easiest person to fool, especially if it's your own idea. You're too close to it, which is why the scientific enterprise absolutely is built on and insists on independent. Are there others too who will come forward and put their logical, is there alignment? Is there consensus there? Do we have enough statistical, rigor over there? So yes, again, science is not, we are the ones doing this science. And therefore, any work we do is going to be affected and influenced by individual and collective psychologies, all the fallibilities, which is why the rigor, which is why independent testing, which is why replication, which is why self-correction. So yes, you're right, Stephen. And this is built into the science. Good science, this is built into it.
Thank you very much, Usha.
Thank you.
Philip, it's your turn.
Thank you, Dr. Usha. Very fascinating and brilliant presentation. Okay,
Thank you.
my question is, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a barrister.
Mhm.
But I've always been intrigued by the rules of evidence in court. And can we say that the human mind, when they look at evidence, the
Mhm.
more empirical, the better. The more empirical, the more your proof is stronger.
Mhm.
Bias of notion of truth.
Mhm.
That's basically my question. I have a second question, but I will go back on the line for that. Another, okay. But that's my first question.
So sorry, the audio wasn't very clear. So let me paraphrase that. So your question is, for
Is it
example,
a bias? Okay.
Please go on.
Okay.
If you,
I'm frozen. Oh, wait.
No, that's okay. I think I may have gotten it, Philip. I think the question is, so how much of it will we ask for as empirical evidence before we can accept that it is true and valid? For example, in a courtroom, is that what it is? How much is enough?
Yeah. Okay. Oh no.
That's okay. You know what, Philip? You can just type in your question in the chat and I will take a look at it and try and answer it from there if the audio isn't clear.
good. Dave,
Right.
go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Usha. It was a very interesting presentation, and I appreciated you examining different approaches from different civilizations towards science. I'm an electrical engineer, so I have a little bit about science. But to me, and also I come from a family of school teachers, so my buddy Kerry mentioned this education thing. It seemed like we're in this structure deal that, of course, a poor teacher ends up with 30 kids and you try to keep them busy. So you give them this experiment to work, and because I always thought, well, why do I have to have a proposition or what I figure what they call it, or theory or what? I mean, I just do this experiment. But it sounded like if there's structure and if there's data and if there's this, that, and the other, that everything's got to be wonderful. And I forgot the details of the story because it's only been 50 years ago. But I think there was some scientist in Italy, as I recall, that got up every morning and documented the sunrise and documented the sunset and took the temperature 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It had gobs and gobs and gobs and data.
Mm-hmm.
But one day, I think it was he invented the thought of the atomic structure,
Right.
which is the only thing that counted in his whole life, but he had all this data. It's funny because, and I know she mentioned penicillin, because that to me is one of my favorite stories. And to me, it's the key is keeping your eyes open. Because, and another thing is I'll forget the detail of the story, but some scientist left his petri dish out or forgot, put the cover on it. And next morning, of course, it was full of bacteria, crud, and this, that, and the other. And of course, 99% of us would say, oh, damn it, I left the petri dish out and throw it away. But for some reason, he looked at it and he studied it. And there was a spot. Well, why is there a spot? Why is there an area, what spot here? There isn't any bacteria. Oh, because something killed the bacteria. Oh, he discovered penicillin just because he didn't throw the damn petri dish away. And so I said the most important thing is keeping your eyes open and realizing that 99.9% of this crap is accidents, and realizing what you have, and also not doing it the way everybody else did it. and all mentioned polio,
Yeah.
which was the COVID of my time when I was a little kid. I think it was third or
Mm-hmm.
fourth grade. I got my polio vaccine. And everybody knows the name Jonas Salk. But, recently I heard the story that he had some strange idea because there was definite ways to make vaccines. And by God, I'm going to do it a different way. Why in the hell would you do it a different way? Why did he do it the way he's supposed to do it?
Yeah.
But he did it, and by God, it worked. And the terrible thing was, early in the process, they sent out a defective batch, and I think 1,000 kids got killed. But they persevered, and that was the solution. So that to me is the thing that we just got to get away from these hang-ups about we've always done it this way or all this data. Um, but it's interesting, as I say, to realize how we advance our life. And I think science is a nice way to describe it. Like you mentioned, astrology. Well, look at the stars, and they look like they're stationary, but they're all moving at millions of miles per hour. Just because they're so far away, they look like they're stationary. So it's interesting because I think I saw one time a forecasting of the Big Dipper. 10 million years, it'll look like this and it'll look like that, or whatever. But anyway, thank you for your presentation. It's nice to talk about something serious for a change.
Thank you, Dave. Well, the first thing about the stars, a lot of the stars we're looking at no longer exist. It's just that the light has taken us, it's just taken that long for the light to reach us. So they're dead and gone already. The thing about science, as I was saying, it's a temperament, it's a practice, it's a system of it's a way of engaging with the world. So and you're right, if I were to find a petri dish of mold, I would throw it out and then curse my skills at being a scientist in a lab. How could I be so foolish? But I'm guessing that's kind of an urban legend as to how some things are discovered. But it's not a lot of things. Yeah, I saw a comment that a lot of science happens by mistake, based on mistakes. Absolutely. It's not the exact event that determines whether something is scientific or not. It's what you do with it. So rational thinking, critical thinking, these are all skills that you develop and you practice them over and over again. And presented with some evidence, presented with some event, you will naturally start to engage with it in a certain way, as opposed to someone else who has not worked on those muscles. So with the education part, critical thinking, rational thinking, and rational thinking doesn't mean excluding emotions. They're as much a part of your rational mechanism and machinery as your forebrain thinking. But exclude all of them. What you have is basically the thinking fast and slow systems in your brain, the heuristic, quick judgment, quick move based on limited data. That is the only muscle that grows strong. And then you start taking impulsive judgment. You're not thinking long and hard and difficult, engaging with difficult topics with critical reasoning and thinking. And these are not skills. You don't develop these skills like you learn to walk. You are taught these skills. They come with years and years of training, with different failures, and it's by reading. I'm sorry, I'll just segue into one personal grudge with the world. People don't read. Please read. So it comes with reading, and so that's where the education part is, and all that is involved in the scientific enterprise. So yeah, thanks, Dave. Before we go to the next one, I think Philip has his question in the chat, and as promised to him, I'll try answering that. His question is: are we biased that the stronger evidence is always empirical? And the second one is: do you know the story of Dr. Semmelweis? Can you tell me why it took so long for his theory of germs to be accepted? Okay, both of them have to do with the resistance to accept newer ideas in the face of us not understanding how those ideas came about in the first place. If you don't know how something emerged, if you don't know, and if you're not familiar with the machinery of empirical discovery, you are naturally going to be, okay, how the hell did he arrive at this, and why the hell should I believe this person? So there's some bit of that. So it's not always empirical. Like you mentioned courtroom, Philip, and I will say that I'll use that as an example. It's not someone with the best evidence that wins a case in the courtroom, especially if there is a jury involved. It's the team that offers the best story that can explain all the current set of evidence is the one that wins that narrative. It's a story that wins a narrative in a courtroom, not the evidence. It's how you present that story to explain a particular situation. And that is true in life. That's why communication about science and about the other epistemic systems are equally important, because without that, you're not building the critical literacy that you will need from people to understand what the hell is going on and question when things are not going right. And that's very similar to, and that's partly the answer to why did it take, any new theory takes a long time to take hold of, simply because it has to challenge and count and provide explanations to, counter evidence from established theories and everything. So whether it's a theory of germs, whether it's relativity, whether it's anything, any new paradigm shifting explanation will take time to find its place. It is going to be, and it's good. There's nothing wrong with it, because you're saying that something is new, something is different. We will attack you in every possible way. You better come up with a good explanation for why things are so. Stronger evidence, no, not always empirical. And whether it's empirical evidence or not, our believability is not dependent on the numbers or the equations. It depends on who's telling us the most convincing story. And then that's human psychology. And it's not that the nature abhors vacuum, it's just the brain doesn't accept open-ended situations. So it will come up with some story to make sense of that situation. Whether it's a good story or not, the brain really doesn't care about it. But yeah, thanks. Dave, Robert?
Robert, go ahead.
G'day. Yeah, thank you, Usha, for a really great account of scientific philosophy. That was really good. It fits really, really well with something I was reading quite recently, demolishing Popper and Kuhn and whatever as inadequate, and suggesting that it's far more complex than either of them admitted. One little criticism: it really irritates me when people say Fleming discovered penicillin.
Oh, yes, I saw that. Yes, my bad.
Florey discovered penicillin. He's the one who did the real research to show what he'd accomplished and what the required doses were and what the dangers were and how long he had to keep it going to make it work, etc., etc., etc. He did all the work. Fleming just found something in a petri dish and moved on to something else that was of greater interest to him. But the main thing I wanted to take up was the argument about whether our solar system is heliocentric or geocentric. It doesn't really matter, according to Mr. Einstein. Any frame of reference is just as valid as any other frame of reference. The point about the heliocentric thing is it makes the calculations a lot easier. They can be done from any frame of reference. I very much doubt that Kepler would have discovered the elliptical orbits if the geocentric theory had persisted. The heliocentric theory makes it much, much easier to do that sort of calculation. And everything else that's been discovered, it has been much, much easier because of the heliocentric thing. But the geocentric theory actually works.
Yeah. Okay.
The calculations are far more complicated, but they can be done from any frame of reference. I could be the centre of the universe, and the calculations would still work. So could you.
Well, I'd love to be the center of the universe, Robert. I wish. I keep claiming that, but neither my daughter nor my dog ever agreed to it. Somehow the world doesn't agree that I'm the center of the universe. But no, I do get your point. Yes, there are frames of reference. Thank you for the correction about the lab, and I will correct it in my notes. So when we do put it out, it will be with the corrected version, and I'll get some research on that too. We'll do the geocentric. I don't know enough whether the geocentric one would work, but I will take a look at that too. Thanks for that.
Well, it works in the sense that all the discoveries about how the solar system works have been done from here, not from the sun.
Not from the sun, right? So okay.
So we can make the discoveries by sitting on Earth, which is rotating around its axis and revolving around the sun and so forth, or maybe the sun's revolving around the Earth. Who knows? It doesn't.
Well, you have corrected for that parallax. So okay, so the physics explanation for that would be, yes, there are frames of reference, but Einstein's frame of reference is dependent on the speed with which you are traveling. So depending on what are the relative speeds of the two objects that are in motion, it will not matter whether it's one or the other. By that logic, yes, Einstein also predicted that something that's moving at the speed of light is going to age faster if it's a biological entity compared to something that is not moving at the speed of light. So if there were a version of me that was moving at a speed of light, which is the entire premise for the movie Interstellar, by the way, right? Someone's moving at the speed of light, and so he's traveled and aged faster and comes back, etc. So yes, in a certain way, you're right. The caveat there is, and within the physics of it, is you want to look at what are those underlying assumptions? What are those frames? What is the speed? What's the mass? Because again, these things apply. Quantum physics, by and large, applies to particles with very, very low mass, because the higher the mass, the momentum shifts. If the momentum shifts, then your the wave functions shift, which means everything else will start changing. So in theory, hypothetically, yes, what you say does hold good. I'm not sure about the mathematics, but I will certainly check that. If I'm wrong, then I will try to present an apology with a brief and an explanation like, okay, this is what I have found. But thanks, Rob.
It wasn't intended as an attack. It was just an alternative.
No, not taken as an attack. I love it. I'm not here to prove that I am right. That would be so boring.
Yeah. On another subject, Kuhn's books, The Structure of Scientific Theories and the Copernican Revolution, a tremendous impact upon how I see the scientific world. Wonderful writing.
Yes. I recently read The Grammar of Science by Pearson, Carl Pearson, the guy who came up with the Pearson's constant in statistics. And this is way before Einstein and others. So he's writing from the pre-Einstein period, and it's fascinating. If anyone wants to read it, they should.
Yeah, I had to learn about Pearson when I was studying statistical method.
Yeah, me too.
Brilliant
I
man.
didn't know he had written this book.
Brilliant man.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Mark, go ahead.
Hello. Usha, I haven't seen you for a long time. It's nice to see you again. I actually do think you should not discard the notion that you might be the center of the universe. I think it's justifiable at some level for each of us to regard ourselves as such in terms of, I just think that's not something to be completely discarded for various reasons. Maybe I'll touch on it when I speak about what it is that I'm curious of. And so I'm wondering when the ants or the octopuses or the crows will finally, with their continued exploration of their world, finally discover, the nature of reality, the ultimate reality, and reach what we're reaching for when we're seeking precisely that. I mean, obviously they will, if they're going to keep sort of making sense of the world that they find. The sense they make of it will make it, the octopus's world is complicated to this extent, but they keep swimming around, it'll get more complicated, and they'll keep exploring and so on, just as we're doing. And that's interesting because I'm thinking there's a big assumption here, isn't there, that, we have the capacity, at least theoretically, to access reality and understand it. And moreover, to explain it. To whom? To each other. Okay, so what is it for you to explain something to me, Usha? Well, it's to satisfy my curiosity, to satisfy my ignorance. So I say, I get it now, thank you very much. And now I walk away believing the world is flat or whatever it is that you've convinced me of, because that's what explanation is, isn't it? So I'm just wondering if we as human beings are like the ants or the octopuses or the crows, insofar as that we can never actually understand reality. All we can understand is the reality to which we have theoretical access, which is less than ultimate reality, then all of our science is going to be creating, let's call it knowledge or information that's going to be able to be sold to those who can be convinced by it. So the fools who think that the world is flat or round or whatever it is, they can be convinced by my scientific evidence and explanation, and I'm successful in doing that. And no matter what it is we're explaining to whomever, it's going to be satisfactory to those who accept it as such and unsatisfactory to those who are dissatisfied with it. So what am I saying? I'm saying that I'm suggesting that the notion that we can explain reality because we have access to it scientifically is wrong. I want to say I want to challenge that and say, no, we're as blind to ultimate reality as are the octopuses.
Okay. Lots of big topics just within that little statement of yours, Mark. Thanks. Good to see you. It's been a long time, and this is my comeback talk. Let's put it that way. Well, ultimate reality, what is it? Is it out there? Is it? So that's a whole question in itself. But let's assume that there is a reality that we can try and get to through whatever means, and science being one of those means. Yes, it is always. So my answer to that is yes, we're always limited by our own nervous systems. We can only know as much as we can know. Yeah. Reality out there, even forget the ultimate reality. The world as seen by an ant or a bat or any other creature, as experienced by them, is very different to what it is that we experience. The electromagnetic spectrum is there. Whether we can perceive it, observe it, we didn't have the tools. We didn't think that it was there. We didn't even suspect that there could be something like that until there were certain progresses, mathematics and physics, et cetera, to kind of tell us. And now we can study the other creatures and see the world as they see it. But can we experience the world as they experience it, which was all Thomas Nagel's, what is it like to be a bat? That was his question. So there's always going to be a black box. There's always going to be an explanatory black hole out there that we do not know. And the good bit about that, scientific enterprise does understand that. It knows. No scientist is going to say, or at least no self-respecting wrench is going to come up and say that this is everything there is to know and there's the end of it. Or there can be nothing else to be known. And which is why even in physics, when we talk about the universe, scientists more and more, I've seen that, but they're probably saying it before too, but I only started paying attention to it, the underlying claim is that the observable universe.
Yeah, okay.
This is the limit to where we can go. So it is there. Some of the limit is our tools, some of the limit is ourselves, which is why there's a convergence of, it comes back to repeatability, it comes back to consensus, etc. Now, the ultimate reality question, is it there? I don't know.
You mentioned the observable universe. I'm thinking of the comprehensible universe.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that the comprehensible universe is smaller than the real universe.
Of course, yes.
So that being the case, then the best we can do is to come up with a kind of science or explanation, I should say, that is satisfactory to, I don't know, a bunch of people. But hang on, here's the problem. If the scientific explanation gets more and more complex in such a way that it can't be absorbed by, I don't know, most people, or maybe just there's 5 people in the world who understand as much as can be understood, what use is that to anybody else? Because we don't know what they're talking about. They're just witch doctors chanting nonsense, because I don't understand the mathematics they're talking about, which they apparently do. So should I just assume that's true? What I'm saying there is that we all have our own lenses, which are, ground by our experiences and our capacity to understand. And that is always going to be always less, necessarily less, I think, than is necessary to understand reality itself. And therefore, I don't know, I'm more forgiving of people who believe in nonsense, because maybe they can't do anything else. Anyway, I've had my say. Thank you.
I agree with you. It's always going to be less. There's always going to be more people who who don't entirely forget the 5 people who know everything, but even to the extent that is known and popular, which is why there is a responsibility laid upon science, which is why I love Feynman and Sagan and a few others like them, whether it's Rovelli. I like it when scientists come out in the open and try to make it as understandable to the non-scientists in the world, because if I know something and I want the world to understand it, the obligation is on me to try and make myself as understandable, even with caveats. We're saying you will still need this bit of extra learning. Please do put in that little effort to understand the paradigm and the structure, but with that, you can learn. That onus is always upon, which is why I love the Reith lectures. I love it when there's established platforms for scientists and philosophers and other thinkers. The onus is on them. The larger onus is on them. But it is also the responsibility of lay people like me and others to try and understand, because they've spent decades trying to learn something, right? I do not understand physics the way Feynman did. Obviously, I don't have a PhD in theoretical physics, but if he is a good teacher, he is going to explain things as well as possible for someone like me to get it. And my end of the bargain is I'm going to put in, so that's where critical thinking, that's where putting some time into it comes in. But ultimately, yes, you're right. There's still going to be a chasm. And that's, as I said, science is not outside of history. It's not outside of human beings. It's us doing this work. So,
well, let me just thank you very much, Usha. I appreciate that comprehensive answer.
Thanks, Mark. Who's next?
John, go ahead.
Right, thank you, David. Yes, Usha, I have an issue for clarification. You made the comment that various aspects of empirical science in the Middle East were, as I quote, preserved and extended by Islamic scholars. Now, this needs to be clarified. Professor Bowman at the Middle Eastern Studies Department at Melbourne University back in the 1970s indicated that by 600 CE, there were more Eastern Orthodox Christians in the Byzantine Orthodox, or what was known as the East Roman Empire, than in the whole of the Western Roman Empire, including across to Europe, France, and those that had got into Germany. Now, these Eastern Christians lived in the countries, and they were certainly the majority. They maybe some were exclusively Christian. Places such as Lebanon, Syria, Armenia, which was the earliest officially a Christian country, and even Arabia, especially a lot of Jews in Arabia when they were kicked out when the temple was destroyed. However, people seem to forget that Muhammad entered the picture only in 600 CE.
That's 600 CE, yeah.
600 CE, and that's a long time that Christianity had been the majority religion. Now, he lived from 570 CE to 632 CE, and when he was at Mecca as a minority, we know that his revelations were very mild and tolerant, but most of the readers of the Quran also tell us that in contrast, when he moved to Medina, his revelations then there were very militant and jihadic as he achieved his majority situation there. So then he became very intolerant towards the Jews. He imposed the tax or the jizya, and even he personally beheaded 800 Jews of the tribe of the Banu Kanuka tribe. And so we can see that there was a very, very militant change here that extended then to the opposition to the Christians and the Jews. Therefore, after 600 CE, it was not just Islamic Muslims, as you have mentioned there, who developed scientific ideas, but many of the Christian countries there made very valuable contributions, and they quite often worked with the Muslims in expanding the views of Aristotle and whatnot. And that's often overlooked by such statements as Islamic, only Islamic. We have also been informed that very few, if any, Muslims have ever been awarded a Nobel Prize for important discoveries. So I think it's very important to clarify any statement that confuses the issue in this eastern area. That's just my attempt to seek a clarification.
Sure. Thanks, John. Yes, an important clarification there. So when I did say Islamic scholars, I was referencing to a completely different time frame, close to 200-300 years after the period you're talking about. Number one. Number two, yes, the Middle East, we forget, was the birthplace of both Judaism and Christianity. So, and I agree with you, John. I'm just offering a little more explanatory framework for that. And it was almost completely Christian until 700-ish AD that we're talking about, right? So until very recently. So yes, the Byzantine scholars, the early Orthodox Christianity, the scientific world was existent even before that. And Islamic scholars, I don't mean the ones that were just living in the Middle Eastern region. They were, by that time, we had Islamic scholars in India as well. A lot of the science that's passed off as Islamic science actually was Indian science. It came from there. And a good reference for that would be William Dalrymple's latest book, The Golden Road, I think, which goes into, and Dalrymple is a fantastic historian and writer and scholar. And he writes in very, very readable books too. If anyone interested in how the so-called Western and Islamic science is actually entirely imported from India, that would be a good reference. So yes, I would certainly qualify that statement with what you're saying, John, that it's not just one religious scholar, it was just one example that I was trying to make, that there were these scholars working, a lot of them actually, the rigor, the scientific work of even the Islamic dynasties and scholars actually came from Spain. We forget that Spain was Islamic for a very long time. So the Moorish scholars, the North African Islamic scholars, they all were working too. So it was just one example that I was trying to give, that it's not entirely a Western continental European style thinking and revolution. There's the rest of the world. Even within that European context, we've got scholars from other cultures working, but still, point taken. John, thank you for that.
Yes, just one other comment is that
Sure.
When they were arguing about religion, they tended to be more concerned about Muhammad's revelations and new impositions on the religions rather than God. Apparently, at first, God was hardly ever debated. They had Allah, and the Jews had Yahweh or Ale. The Christians had Ale Elohim, and whatnot, and of course the Muslims trace themselves back to Ishmael and Abraham. So they felt they had this in common, but of course the practicalities of the situation for Muhammad to impose his particular revelations meant that they were the argued, and of course then in the end it ended up with they say there were about 200,000 hadiths that were around that had to be sorted through. So there was a tremendous amount of activity going on, clarifying all these and expanding them and adding new laws and whatnot. But basically, it's interesting that originally God wasn't an issue.
No, it wasn't. At least for the Abrahamic religions, it wasn't an issue. And there again, there were, but one bit about the science bit as well. They would, I didn't particularly bring in other religions simply because I was just trying to give an example. But then there's scholars from all religious traditions working, even exactly the same time as the Ottoman Empire was declining. There were the Jewish scholars sitting, particularly the Andalusian region. A lot of Jewish scholars did exceptionally good job working along with the Muslim scholars at that time. So all that is happening. And at the same time, we do have, so this is an entirely where we can have another talk about it at some time. Religion and God, two different concepts. So at least in the Abrahamical religions, and just as a quick extension or comment to John's point there, no, they all date back to Abraham. So they all have that common thread running through all three of them. So however they codify it later, however the institutionalizing of God and everything else has happened since, that's strictly within the historical trajectory, and it's all human drama. It's all human story. And human stories, they can be studied and understood in human terms. We don't necessarily need to invoke a supernatural entity for that. But yeah, I get the point. So this is scientific work was not happening in isolation away from all this other stuff. That's really what I was trying to say earlier as well. Human beings,
and my
while
final
involved.
point is, I heard someone talking the other day, a Lebanese person, and he said, well, in his own lifetime, when he was born, Lebanon was a Christian dominated country, a majority country, but now, of course, it's become very much a Muslim dominated country. So this process may have been going on since 600, but it's still going on today in the life of a particular person. I thought that was a very interesting insight to think about.
Yes. Again, if anyone wants to read, William Dalrymple's From a Holy Mountain is a good book. I should write to him and tell him to cut a check for me for his promotion of his work. But no, please do read William Dalrymple if you're interested. Anyways, thank you. Thanks, John.
And thanks for your talk. It was extremely clear and very easy to follow. So thank you very much. I think we all learned a tremendous amount and helped to clarify our own thinking. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
George, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Listening to you, what I think what you're arguing, well, first and foremost, I want to note that, of course, in the ancient world, the Islamic world was a major source of scientific breakthroughs, as was the East Asia, right? It's, indeed, the European world was probably at least 2 generations behind the scientific knowledge of East Asia and the Middle East. I think it's notable in terms of what's been discussed at this point. What I do want to say specifically to your talk is that, and this is my understanding of what you're arguing, is that there's a lot of rule of thumb in terms of approaching reality, and that nomethetical knowledge, in other words, law-like behavior, in terms of the behavior of matter and energy, in terms of science, in terms of medicine, yes, of course, nomethetical knowledge is important, but again, there's a rule of thumb component to science broadly, and maybe especially perhaps to medicine. There's maybe rule of thumb, artisan craft, maybe a little more to the point. I mean, what do you think of that observation of what you were saying?
So are you saying that when you say rule of thumb, you mean there's some heuristics involved? It's not just entirely empirical evidence-based. We do make guesswork.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, to a certain degree, yes. Now, where the rigor does, again, where the scientific rigor comes in is testing that guesswork. It's a good science, which is why if you look at any scientific, even if you look at, I'm not sure, but whether it's there now, but when I was doing my high school a long time ago, but if you look at any proof, for example, in a physics textbook or a chemistry textbook, you do have things like assumptions underneath it, right? So, for example, if for 2 objects, I'm simplifying it for the sake of this argument. So if you were to drop, the common example, you drop 2 objects, no matter the mass, they're going to fall to the ground at exactly the same time. Mass is irrelevant when it comes to gravity, right? If that is the argument, the assumption that is not said there is assuming that there is no wind drag. So there is an assumption, right? So good science for the most part, clarifies the assumptions under which something is 100% applicable, whereas versus what is the impact of all these other things. So friction, for example, something that's going to slide off with a certain speed over an inclined surface. If there is a calculation there, for example, then the assumption there behind that, the law or a particular theory, there will be assuming that there is zero friction. So once you introduce the friction into place, how is it going to behave? So all those assumptions and guesses and things a good scientific paradigm will have included as many of those before coming up with a law that says this is how it works, right? So yes, there is a good bit of guesswork. So in the medical world, I think which is why they're paid the most as well, is anesthesiologists. Anesthesiology is witch doctory to a certain degree, simply because
it's artist and craft. It's talent.
It is. However, the caveat there, which comes in with years and years of discipline, practice, and training, is you get so good at it that you're taking much more reliable, grounded, and correct guesses than wrong ones. So you're not taking me guessing what should be the exact combination of a certain cocktail of drugs to be able to put this person. Effectively, the person is in coma for the period of that, if it's a general anesthesiology procedure. And then that person must come out of it. It is a lot. The best anesthesiologists are the ones that do have that extra. Yes, there is that talent, but it's talent trained.
Well, it's wisdom. What you're saying is wisdom. There's wisdom here, and not simply science.
Yeah. So the critical thinking is a tool that science uses. Critical thinking is used outside of science as well. Critical thinking is the foundation for many. So, for example, if I'm to go completely outside of the scientific enterprise, if I were to write an essay or write a story, a fiction, a piece of fiction, I still have to employ, there is a logical structure and narrative to it. So if I have defined that these characters behave in certain ways within the parameters of the story, for the story to work and for you to believe in it, I cannot have the characters go off and do something else unless I can actually come up with an explanation as to why they're doing that. There is that critical framework in there as well. Good stories are they seem effortless. They seem completely believable, but it's so hard to write good stories for exactly that reason. It's hard to write a bad story. So, so it's the framework is exactly the same. You are training that particular faculty to be so that you can use it in this particular enterprise, in this area of work. Great teachers have that. They've probably learned, whether intuitively or with just serious practice, conscious practice, that is intentional practice, how to read a room, how to read a child that's in distress, how to read whether this person is going to learn this in this way or not.
Right.
So that's
in other words,
yes. So that's
in other words, the science has to be applied in real time. You have to know how to apply it in real time.
Yeah, critical thinking. Yes.
Yeah,
it is.
Well, and wisdom, wisdom again, too. Science, knowledge, right? And so, one point I'll make to you, and it seems like a lot of what you're arguing around, if I understand you, I think what you're really critical of, if I understand you correctly, is scientism, which is this idea that nomethetical knowledge is really the only kind of knowledge.
Correct.
And that if something isn't understood nomothetically, it someday will be understood nomothetically.
It could be. I'm not saying it will be. I'm saying that it could be. You can, So what I am.
But see, this is the issue, though. This is the issue, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, not to get too lost in this, but let's take the question of the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, As I understand it, we don't know very much about the brain, and we know even less about the mind. So my point would be this: the argument or the suggestion or the assertion that one day we will have, quote unquote, a scientific understanding of the human mind, that right now is simply a faith, because we don't even have a theory of the mind that would even allow us to guide our empiricism, to develop a whole holistic theory of the mind. So my point is that some of these claims about, oh, one day we'll be able to discover things mnemothetically, or we'll understand why we have gravity. I mean, some of these things do fall in the category of faith. It's almost like a theistic faith. I mean, I'm going to submit to you.
I agree with you, but I'm not even making a claim that one day that you would have this complete knowledge. You would probably have a little bit more. You will know something more about it in a certain way. But I'm certainly not saying. I mean, I'm trained in neuroscience, so I don't think I can, or any scientist in that area would say we will know everything there is to know about the human brain, let alone leave the mind out of it, even just the functioning.
I guess this will be the point.
Yeah,
this will be the point in the end, is that our knowledge of the brain, as far as I understand it, is almost entirely pragmatic, which is to say that some people respond to certain treatments and other people don't, or they respond to certain treatment. You have to apply the treatment one way with one person and apply it differently with someone else. So again, this is pragmatic. This is not, we're just doing things to the brain. Sometimes this stuff works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Correct.
Right? Which is very different than, let's say, you're dealing the organ of the heart, right? The heart, there's much more of a science. You tend to know what the interventions are going to cause. Understanding that every heart's different, but there's a much more solid grounding as the science of the heart.
The brain doesn't lend itself to the same consistencies in a way. The brain, we're getting to a certain degree. Yes, we are getting there, but I don't think that it does lend itself simply because of simply because it's an extremely complex organism with an extremely high sensitivity to the environment too, compared to the other organs. So yes, I do agree with you there. But what I will not say is that we will know everything we will need to know about it to be able to consistently and universally deal out medication or whatever example that is, in a way that we would know about the heart or the kidneys or whatever.
Let me offer you this one last thought, because I know other people are waiting.
Yeah.
Which is, I have a book coming out. It's called Metaphysics versus Scientism.
Okay.
And it's coming out in a couple of months. I just got the galleys today. It's
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy with this book. I'm very proud of this book because it deals with metaphysics. I do make commentary on the brain, of course, drawing from neuroscientists. I make comments on genetics. Again, to the extent that I'm, competent to make some solid grounding, which I'm not that competent, but you understand what I'm saying. In any event, it's in the chat. The other thing is, if you want to send me a private message, if you want to give me your email address, I will be happy to send you the galley poos. Again, it's completely at your discretion.
Oh, I'd love to.
I think you would find it fascinating.
I'd love to read it.
I could give you my email. Let's approach it that way. I'll give you my email.
No, George. I always give my email address out in the chat when I do a talk. I love listening to and conversing with people. There's a lot of people that I already know from my other previous talks. So yes, you can reach out. I give my email address. I give my mobile number. I'm not that privy or, So yes.
Put it in the chat.
I will.
And I will send you the galleys. I'm working with them now. And so once I think they're close enough to finish, I will be more than happy to send you a galley, a copy of the book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sister.
Thanks. Who's next?
Okay. Remco, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. What a meandering conversation we've had this afternoon. My God, my brain was, I had to switch off. I was just going, I guess I'm monorail, and maybe I'm the one that's stuck, not you guys. But anyway, that was my view. Hey, I started to talk about the first, third person and how that fits in with science. I'd like to make an assertion, and it goes contrary to what somebody said earlier. I believe science is coming to a focus point, and it's a focus point of realization, and that is that science is actually is being recognized as a process of creating a record. And it's formalizing what I said earlier. Let me just say it again. It's a process of creating a record as a trace, or as stabilized, I'm just trying to put it formally, as a trace or a stabilized way of communicating our attention, our measurement, and judgment. In other words, it's coming back to the first person. And so, I think one of the first big breakthroughs in that, I would suggest, the general relativity theory by Albert Einstein. And he started to come close, but he couldn't. Look, he was a classical scientist by training, by background and mentality, and so he created these little boxes for observers to be in, accelerating and inertial frames of reference. I call them little trick boxes, because in the end, I would suggest that general relativity theory is actually a way of not quite declaring what I'm saying, that in the end, science is first person and must be seen as that. And if I communicate it in any way, I'm stabilizing my measurement, if you like, or judgment. And in that process, I am removing some information. And then that has to be, once we do that, I think, the so-called enigmas of quantum science will be resolved, and a lot of other ambiguities that we're stumbling and trying to deal with, like the example I provided earlier about psychology 10 years ago, when they were unable to reproduce their results, and it caused a lot of discomfort in circles of psychology. But I think that's the big breakthrough. I suggest that we're getting very close. We have been moving towards that. In the 17th century, we gave up the notion of a God's eye view, and we started to accept a view from nowhere. And we're now sort of starting to drift. I've suggested big breakthrough is recognizing that ultimately it's a first-person world. There is only an observer, and what we communicate is a stabilized record of that. That's my suggestion, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But yes, there's some very interesting ideas and theories coming about quantum superposition and a few other things, and how it can be applied to human observation, the observer's effect. These have been floating around for a while, and there seems to be some fairly robust discussion about it going on right now. It could be. I haven't caught up with the latest in that space yet, but I do hear about it, so occasionally in some feeds. I don't know. It could be getting there. I don't know how close we are to. There are a lot of metaphysical debates and things simply about quantum superposition and the extension of that. But yeah, we could probably look at that in another talk and see what's there and what sounds feasible, at least from a theoretical perspective. What's the evidence so far that can back, and how far can you push it? Part of the problem is that and again, I'm not saying this with any specific example in mind, but this is what I will be looking at, is when someone publishes a paper or puts some interpretation about an experiment, particularly in the quantum realm, quantum physics. So to what extent can it be pushed? To what extent can it be extrapolated? Where is it valid? Where does its validity stop? Because common journalism, public journalism, does like to take that and then immediately apply to consciousness. And I've deliberately not touched that word consciousness, because that's a big can of snakes. It's a crate of snakes, and we can get into a whole discussion around that. But yeah, just to that point, yeah. So yeah, that's a lot of discussion that's going on right now. So it'll be interesting to see. Yep. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer.
David, your turn. Unmute yourself, please.
That's it.
Good. Go ahead.
First of all, a very, very interesting presentation. It's not often that I can follow a presentation through 2 hours and still be with it at the end. So that was great.
Thank you.
And a lot of the stuff, I think in the last few questions you've answered already, but I'll sort of put them in. I'll go back to the subject, the philosophy of science. Two comments I had, which is in relation to the work that I'm doing myself, was Feynman. His comment that just because something is not scientific doesn't mean it's wrong. It only means that it's not scientific. Now, you've already sort of skirted around that one already, I think. And the other one is a work of Ludwig Fleck and paradigms, and that science isn't a destination, it's a journey, and that history is so important that that everything is built on what has gone before. So it could sort of more formalize those two questions in sort of a more formal answer those areas.
Right. What was the bit about just because something is not scientific doesn't mean it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So what Feynman is talking about there is simply because it hasn't been worked out within the framework or the paradigm of the scientific language doesn't necessarily mean that it is wrong. It's just that means that you have not examined and explained it in a scientific paradigm potentially with experimental evidence and stuff. So, for example, something like that coming more and more, it's with greater force. And this speaks to the symbolic language versus the empirical epistemic structures within the scientific paradigm is all the studies that are being done on meditation, for example, and the effect on the human body, on how our body reacts to it. It is exceptionally rigorous work, right? That's going on, which until before that, it was anecdotal. It was entirely anecdotal, whether it's written in autobiographical narrative, first-person narrative, whether it's entirely in the esoteric realm. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means that and people would, swear by it. For example, like it does work, it does do things. So there are a lot of claims that perhaps cannot still be tested within the empirical framework. For example, if there is a Buddhist claim to past lives and the impact that they have on your consciousness today, it's perhaps not going to be testable in any case, but doesn't mean that you throw out everything. So everything that can be tested, you can, and which is what's happening now. So suggestibility, for example, the experiments about self-talk and all those things. Now we've got the apparatus to test the effect on the epigenetics of it, to look. So that's the part, which is why you've got to always frame it within those anecdotal claims or in the cultural claims that you're testing, and what are those parameters. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just not been available for an analysis of this kind until now. So that's one part of it. The other part, yes, I mean that's the thing I come back to, right? It's all within. What was the part two of your question? That it's the human scope of it. That there's no. It's a journey.
Ludwig Fleck,
yeah.
with his assertions that all science is built on history. On what's gone before.
Correct.
And add a little bit of that science can never claim to be right because someone is always going to come along and do some little bit more and a little bit more. So it's always a
right.
always a journey, not a destination.
Yeah. So the thing is, there are proven assertions, but there are no absolute truths. So science deals with facts to a large extent, and to certain truths that these facts contribute to. Tomorrow, if the evidence changes, the fact changes, and therefore the truth also changes. So that's one part of it. Which is the error, which is why science is good, in the sense that there's a lot of self-correction built into it. The other part, which, well, again, given that it's a shorter talk, or rather, we can only address so many things. In a slightly more detailed discussion, I would probably discuss it in a full 1 hour session, 40-minute session maybe. Science is essentially probabilistic. Science is not deterministic in that sense, right? It claims to the most likelihood of something being true given all the evidence. So in that sense, yeah, anything that comes by that can be explained and it's observed and recorded in the right framework, if it can change the law, it will. And that is the scientific enterprise. And yes, it's all, again, as I was saying, it's all within the context of history. It's within the context of, we are the ones doing it. So it's always a human enterprise. It's not an enterprise that's sitting outside of human life. It is part of history. It is part of all the forces that influence human life and human history. So it is the journey. It is our journey, just as the mythologies have been our journey. Science and its enterprise is another journey. Arts and architecture is our journey. So it's one of those. It just happens to be the explanatory framework that gives us a structure of assemblage to all the other experiences that we have. It just happens to be one of them. I can tell my daughter that I love her without having to get into the neurochemistry of love. Doesn't mean that my statement is wrong on its own, right? So, yeah, I would agree with both the statements, really.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your comments.
Thanks, David.
Stephen, go ahead.
I was going to get back to politics and history again. And, well, you see the different cultures around the world. Of course, I'd probably differ the Anglo-Saxons a bit from the rest of the Europeans, because the Anglo-Saxons had a wonderful run. They benefited. They were on top of the world and were benefiting greatly. I remember, following the work of the pseudo-scientist Wilhelm Reich when I was young, back in the 1970s, and he said that one day the world was going to succumb to what he called the emotional plague, an era of mass hysteria. And I thought, how silly. Looked around the world in the 1970s, doesn't seem too hysterical. Here I am 50 years seeing the Western world succumb to mass hysteria. The British used to have the stiff upper lip in their grand days, and now they've lost that. They've become hysterical. You saw when they had the Kyoto and the climate conferences that they couldn't simply handle a scientific fact without trying to turn it into something political. A new age had started, because there's too many institutions now that are out for the dollar. And the whole thing with Kyoto and the climate science became a form of mass hysteria, because they thought there was money in it, for starters, and there was money in it. And I question if what we've known as science will survive a hysterical world. Thank you.
So the question is, do I think whether the scientific enterprise can survive the mass delusion and this particular hysteria? Will it be under attack as it is right now? Yes. My personal opinion, yes, it will survive it. In what shape and what form and how it's going to grow and evolve from that point on, again, it's for the future to know and for me to potentially just guess. Again, these periods of attack on on such enterprises, again, have not been new, right? These have been there all through history.
Oh, well, in Western civilization, we had a period of hysteria around the 15th and 16th centuries.
Correct.
Then they became calm, and now they're going back to being hysterical.
So these things are there. Now science has to find a better language, which comes back to the point about science has also been deified and glorified, right? We say it, it's right. You get off your high horses, get off your pedestals, and explain. If you want the world to follow your argument, you've got to present it to the world in a way that they can follow your argument. So get off your high horses and talk about what you're doing, explain what you're doing. So science will become, or the scientists or the scientific enterprise as such, people working within that space will get down and start speaking with people. They have to, otherwise it's going to become another regime. Just because a scientist says it is so, it is so. It's not. That's not what science is at all. If someone within science is going to make claims like these, and you've got a dictatorship straight up over there. So both ways, it's got to cut both ways. If there is, and what is, and this is for science to understand, and people within policy and other things have got to understand this as well. Some of the questions being raised, if they are valid, you better address them. You have to address those questions, right? You can't have science and scientists and others turning into another
priesthood.
Yeah, it's not priesthood, which is partly why, bring it down, get off your high horses. You owe an explanation. If you want the world to follow what you're saying, and you're saying it's for their own good, then it's incumbent on you to and which is why your ethics will be questioned. The way you conduct your experiments, they have to be questioned. The scientific enterprise cannot be above questioning. That's your unquestioned priesthood. The moment that happens, that's when the regression will start. Not when regression won't start when people attack science, whether misguidedly or because of hysteria or whatever reason, right? Regression happens when science refuses to acknowledge that people, when they do well-intentioned and the right questions, if they start ignoring them and try and act high and mighty, that's the regression point. It's not another priest. It's not an altar. It's not a priesthood.
Thank you, Usha.
John, your turn.
Well, thank you. Yes, I just want to make a little bit of a further clarification. I noticed in the chat, just having a quick look there, that they mentioned that jihad is actually spiritual. And I'm wondering if that's sort of as if that was being completely ignored. Now, I just want to clarify this sort of situation. Islam has always seen two worlds, the world of Islam and, of course, the world of the non-believers, in other words, everybody who's not a Muslim. And so they've got these two distinct worlds that they're operating with. But there is also what you could call a triple M Islam. And I think it's important to see that these three M's are obviously mild Muslims, and they're the Shiites and their practices, their mysticism, and also their concern about the spiritual jihad, which is having a conflict with what's within you that you don't like. The spiritual is the inner dimension of jihad, which is, of course, totally legitimate. Then there's the second M's, and that's moderates. And they're the ones that we see going to the mosque, and they sometimes say that 25% of Muslims should be seen to be the average, the normal, the moderates. So what they have are concerned about is having a way of living, a way of life. Maybe they won't accept everything in the Quran, as it's said. They realise it's, it's written back in the 600s, 700s, 800s, and that's many, many years ago now. But they do find in there principles for a way of living. But of course, then you've got the third M, you've got the mild Muslims and moderates, and then of course you've got the militant Muslims, and they're into terrorism and conquest, and that's been evidence, since the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York, that they really mean business. They don't care if they're removing thousands of people. And even the Brotherhood is making it quite obvious. The Islamic Brotherhood is making it quite clear that they have the policy, that the 5 steps they usually mention. First of all, you immigrate to a country, then you populate it, then you dominate it through the ballot box, then you destroy as best you can the present culture and religion and replace it with your Sharia requirements. And the ultimate game is to establish the world caliphate, again, under the Sharia law. So they make no secret about that, and they look like they're having quite success, because in America, in Alabama, apparently, and Birmingham, they have simply set up their mosque, and part of the Constitution is those 5 points that were just mentioned. And so America's got a start of it. So you've got to see that there are 3 things. I've always admired the Sufis and the way they get themselves in their twirling dirt, and the dervishes, get into a state of meditation and whatnot. That all seemed to be pretty mild to me. And then you've got the moderates, who are simply trying to lead a reasonable sort of a life. But our big preoccupation, of course, was with the militants and the terrorists. So I think that we need to have a balance there. And when we say Islam, it's not just thinking of the terrorists, but there's a total picture to look at. That's just my clarification and maybe somebody or other here thinks that I'm only concerned about the militant, or they're the only sort. But apparently, they say 75% they shouldn't be considered in that at all. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm not sure I'm required to comment on that.
I just wanted to,
you wanted to clarify it to that chat. All right.
What was in the chat mainly. Okay. Not so much you, but what was in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm not looking at the chat. I don't even know what's going on there. So, yeah.
Well, it's a bit hard to do 2 things at once.
Yeah, 2 things at once. So I'll take a look at it later. Yeah.
Philip, it's your turn.
Me. Okay. Just a quick question, Dr. Usha. Usha, right? Dr. Usha? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Do you think there is a rise of respectability with pseudosciences like astrology after you go through a philosophy of science course, and with Kuhn and everybody, I seem to get the impression there is a rise of respectability with astrology and feng shui and what they call the pseudosciences. Just your comment.
Okay. Right. Why do we still go towards, and this is a human response, right? When, particularly in tumultuous times, and I said, we will go to people who offer us the best narrative. When you're going through any kind of pain, whether it's an individual or whatever, the first thing you want is relief from pain, not an explanation for why it exists and how it has come about. So it not necessarily in times like these, it can be in any time. Tomorrow, I'll give you a personal example. In many traditional, in I think everywhere around the world, there's this concept of evil eye, right? Especially when children fall sick, there's the parents and grandparents, the elders in the community, they say, someone's evil eye has been on the child, do one or two things, right? I would completely ignore it in my case. They're like bollocks, superstition, right? But if my daughter was sick, and if my grandmother or my mother would tell me, apart from doing everything else that you're doing, taking to the doctor or whatever, do this also, I will do it.
Yeah.
Right? So that is human. That is, and I have done it. I mean, I know very well that it's baloney. I know that it's nothing to do with anything. But if I need to trick myself to believe, to feel in control of that situation so that I can better take care of her. So, you kind of take a little bit of rock salt and red chili, and then you kind of do this around the kid, and then 2-3 times counterclockwise, and then you put it either in fire or you flush it down the drain, and then just wipe the eyes. So you do that regularly. It's a cultural practice, right? I know it's baloney. I know it doesn't mean a damn thing. It's not going to work. I wouldn't do it for me. But if my daughter was sick, or if my dog was sick, and someone were to tell me, apart from everything else you're doing, please do this as well, I will do it. That is about human. That's being human. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, knowing where does it get to be a problem? It becomes a problem where I refuse to take medical help, or I refuse to do everything else, knowing what I'm doing for my comfort. It's like I still sleep with a small stuffed toy. I don't do that because I'm afraid of the dark. I do it because I like doing it. That's a comfort blanket. But if I were sick, I would just still hold my stuffed toy and still go to the doctors and do what I need to do. If I allow so there's a lower order. When I say lower and higher, I don't mean in terms of how important something is or not. Anything that is related to bare minimum survival is foundational for us. If you don't survive, then there's nothing else beyond that. So human beings will act in accordance with that. If this is going to help me feel good and get through whatever it is that I'm going through now, I am going to do it. But using the same argument or becoming dependent on it, watching a movie for feel good is one thing. Not feeling good without watching those movies day in, day out, that's a completely different problem. You've become addicted to that short dopamine hit, right? So that's where the difference comes in. Why do we still have one thing and not the other? So that's my understanding of why we still do it.
I just want to mention that my late friend who died, he was an astrologer, and a lot of Chinese businessmen in the Philippines, I live in the Philippines, would come or ask for his ideas on what's happening, and they would correlate it with the business.
Yeah, it happens. It happens in my family. So there's that thing. There is something called culture, right? So this is a cultural and a human practice. Again, a symbolic practice. We do need symbols and metaphors. That's why myths have survived. That's why mythologies have survived. They're as important. I can live without knowing how theory of relativity works, but I'll be damned if I don't know what the mythological symbols in real life are. I need to understand that for survival. So to a certain existential level, they take primacy. I don't need to understand how the chemistry of love works to know how I must conduct myself in relationships. They're two different things. An explanatory framework is not an experience of that phenomenon. Experience precedes an explanation every single time. So not necessary that it's bad. It's just that how aware am I of what I'm doing? It's the awareness that matters there. Thanks, Philip.
Will, your turn.
Well, thanks, David. Thanks, Usha.
Hey, Will, long time.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks. I really like your style, Usha. I just in regards our ability to understand everything, or this sort of hope that one day we will. I regularly sort of have this contemplation on the emergence of reality itself.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a form of obsessive compulsive disorder where some poor, unfortunate individuals cannot stop thinking about why is there something rather than nothing, and they become utterly obsessed with that question.
Yep.
I'm a couple of stages off that, fortunately, but I do think about it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw Professor Sir Roger Penrose, Oxford University physicist, and Professor Sir Martin Rees, another, both knighted by the Queen, both Nobel Prize winners, professors, physics and mathematics, respectively, in a program called Closer to Truth. I'm not sure if you know Closer to Truth, where the guy who, it's a series of YouTube interviews, and he's been obsessed with the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And he interviews mathematicians and philosophers and quantum physicists, you name it, on all manner of topics, including consciousness and the notion of infinity and so on. I highly recommend it. I think you'd really like it. It's called Closer to Truth. But in that program, that's where I saw Professor Sir Martin Rees and Professor Sir Roger Penrose on the question of why is there something rather than nothing. They concur with my theory, which is that it's utterly inexplicable to human logic, because you've either got a causeless cause, or if there was a cause of the cause, then it's infinite regression all the way down. Therefore, there was no cause and energy existed infinitely without beginning. So some people, and some in this group, even when you put that to them, there seems to be an arrogance where they'll say, oh, we'll work it out. Look at what we've worked out already. But I really think there's sort of like a color blindness to this problem, that not everybody gets it. But if you meditate on it, I meditate, I try and meditate every day a little bit and be mindful throughout the course of the day. But if you're contemplative of this, phenomena, this reality, it does dawn on you that it's utterly, forever inexplicable to human logic and reason, that something cannot have a beginning. And then when it hits you like a freight train. But I think some people are so compartmentalized in their own sort of prefrontal cortexes, and they're just whirling around all the wonderful information there that they have, that they're incapable of understanding how it's almost incomprehensible how incomprehensible the emergence of reality is. So I just wanted to say that. And to me, I mean, you can say, well, what's the point of thinking of it? We'll never work it out. But to me, it just puts things in perspective, that the most fundamental question is in regards to the emergence of reality itself, and that itself is completely beyond comprehension. So it kind of puts everything in perspective to some degree, to me.
Well, yeah. Thanks for that, Will.
Thank you.
To a part of your think about, you're obsessively thinking about the first principles or the foundations or the source, doesn't naturally mean there's something, wrong with your thinking apparatus. So two things.
It's not a problem for me. I'm not that obsessed, but it's sort of a revelation.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Yes, it could be turtles all the way down. In terms of what's the ultimate nature of, one above the other, below the other, below the, is there an eternal, is there an absolute beginning, and is there an absolute end? It's the problem. And again, I don't have the answers to this. We don't know, at least I don't. Because if energy is indestructible, then by extension, it's got to be there at all times. So what is it when there is no creation? When there is nothing? Is it just pure energy? And then at what point is the energy going to turn into something not just energy? These are beautiful questions. We've got possibilities, and then we've got stories as to what could be, could not be. And these are the questions. And so, but the thing is, you don't stop. And in the quest to find answers to these questions, you may not find the answer to that question, but you will learn a lot about the world and the universe along the way, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
So I would rather us keep asking these questions, even if we can never know the answer.
Yeah, and cultivating that sense of awe, I think.
Yeah, that's the sense of awe, right?
Especially for atheistic people, we do want to cultivate that sense of awe.
Atheistic people don't mean that there is no sense of awe. It's just that our sense of awe, by and large, is not dependent on, the potential supernatural entity.
Exactly.
That's all it is. The awe is always there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will.
George, go ahead.
Yes. I'm thinking we had just an exchange where I argued that indeed there's this notion of scientism, that all that exists is matter and energy, and actual knowledge is only nomethetical knowledge. And so, I certainly do think that there is the scientist, out there that is dogmatic and narrow-minded. But I also think there's another component to the politics, which is that I think they fear theism. They fear the introduction of theism into their work. So I give you the example of the fundamental constants. You may already know this, where the fundamental constants I'm assuming are key to the operation of the universe, and for them to occur randomly is 10 to the 136 power, which it just seems impossible. Let's just say, let's just assume that. And so, to me, and this is what I argue in my book, is that this is reflective, and this argument is not new to me, but I argue panpsychism and emergent intelligence, I use that phrase, permeates the universe. And so this is how we can account for the fundamental constants, ecology, the existence of life, and even the human mind. And by that I mean our ability to have language and to share ideas and to look at the world and see the same thing, right? So, and mind you, in the end, I think part of the argument that I'm making here to you is that science, when you approach things dogmatically and narrowly, right, you fail to see all the things that foreground our existence, such as the fundamental constants, such as concepts of justice and morality, such as the fact that we see the world in fundamentally the same way. In other words, I say a tree, we look at it, you say, yes, you see a tree as well. And so, on this point of the fundamental constants, to me, I found a very curious turn within the sciences, physical sciences, is that in order to account for the fundamental constants, they made the turn, which is really unhinged, in my opinion, from an empirical point of view, to say, oh, there must simply be 110 universes to 136 power. And we just happen to be in the one universe, which again just seems to me it's almost like hostile to empiricism to make that argument. But my point is that I can never get, not that I'm interested in this, but I can never get an argument regarding the emergent intelligence. I can never get that into a scientific journal. Whether it be the fundamental constants or the replication of cells, I cannot get that into a journal. So there is a dogmatism that I think in part is born of the fear of the introduction of theism, or that they're gonna somehow, scientists somehow going to contribute to worship. There's that, and that theism is going to intervene in the work of science in some way, shape, or form. Am I making sense to you? I'm wondering.
Yes, you are, but I'm just trying to see, because these are broad statements. They may be true in some cases, but yes, there are dogmatic scientists, and yes, there are open-minded theologians. There's both in this spectrum of being alive, and we somehow have got to muddle our way together. I'm not sure that there's ever going to be 100% accord from either ways, but to the point, yes, you can see a tree, but and you see the tree, I see the tree, we both call it the tree. And to that extent, as far as first order perception is concerned and first order labeling of that particular object is concerned, we might agree. And then that's where it stops. After that, you can have a divergence. So there are people who will consider that tree holy and therefore cannot be cut down.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the orders of perception is all I'm saying.
I mean, no, I mean that when someone starts calling it holy, I mean that's something else altogether. I mean, you're seeing a tree now, but they're simply saying that there's some kind of divinity in the tree. So they're just making a metaphysical claim that obviously, they're not claiming is there empirically. They're just saying that somehow they have a faith that there's a divinity in the tree. But we see tree, we see rock, we see house, we see car. But my point is that, our whole reality is foreground by this cosmos, right? Including the way the mind works. And again, this shared, I'm going to argue it's a shared mind because, again, we see the world the same. We're able to communicate complex ideas, right? And so when I say abundance, you understand what that means, ambiguity, right? All languages are translatable, right? So again, my point is that there's this, or the assumption in science is that this foreground will somehow one day be explained, right? So that's a theism in and of itself. That's a dogma. I guess what I'm going to say to you is, so I don't view the world. I try to argue, and again, this is something that, again, you'll see if you ever do read my book, is that there has to be a third way of metaphysics. In other words, we cannot simply say either there's only matter and energy, or the other option is theism, right? They can't, because that's simply neither one of those ways. I think that's a fundamental mistake of humanity, that we see those two as the only two options in terms of understanding the world, right? I mean, I for one am an advocate for Hegelianism. Okay. So in other words, I'm going to say,
okay.
What we need to be is post-worship, right? That's our problem. We need to be post-worship. We need to say, okay, yes, there's an emergent intelligence, in my opinion, that basically is responsible for the cosmos. But there's no point in worshiping this thing, whatever it is, worship or trying to get to know it. This is like outside of rationality, right? And so, we see the world as an ontology, right? In other words, as a process. We philosophize about this process, and this includes science. And that's really where our focus should be, on philosophizing about this ontology we live in, right? And, to think about where this emergent intelligence came from or where it's going, that's a waste of time. That's an absolute waste of time. You're not going to gain any knowledge on that because we weren't there at the beginning, and I'm going to presume we're not going to be there at the end. Mm-hmm. And we have very important issues confronting us: global warming, the threat of nuclear war. I don't know where anyone believes that there's money in global warming, or global warming science. I just don't understand how anyone can make that assertion. But that we have issues that confront us immediately that we need to overcome if we're going to survive as a civilization or as a species. So again, why are we wasting our time? I'm going to say philosophizing about where this thing comes from, or where it goes, or that it's divine. Right, all of this is divisive, is a waste of time. It's an effort to divide us, in fact, of matter in the worst instances. But I know I'm sort of on my soapbox a bit. But I'm very much interested in your thoughts on this.
Okay, there's a lot of material in there, so I'll just try to offer a short personal take. Yes, there are immediate issues, and this is how I think of it, right? Yes, there are immediate issues at hand. Yes, there are all kinds of problems that we need to solve, though at least we must try and solve for us, just for pure survival reasons, right? But the problems themselves are not simple. They're not uncomplicated. They require different kinds of thinking, different manner of engagement, challenging our own presumptions and assumptions about everything. So there's a lot going on there. It's not a straightforward thing that, hey, I'm right. Can't you see that this is wrong? We shouldn't be doing it. Human beings never work that way, and all history is proof to that. So that's one part of it. The other part is why are we wasting our time on, essentially unanswerable questions or whatever? My only answer to that is because human beings are curious. We will always ask questions about things that we have no business even trying to, or rather, okay, there's no way for us to know. It is going to be there. Human beings will ask questions. We are not, it's not that we are looking at more than merely surviving. Yes, survival issues are paramount. Those questions are the ones that need most of our attention. But then give me a moment's break from dealing with all the survival issues of just my own life. The first thing I want to do is I want to listen to music. It offers no survival value to me whatsoever, but I will do it. And I will read a story. So there's part of surviving, and this is just a personal take. Again, everyone can have different ways of thinking about this. There's the question of what I survive, whether I survive and how I survive. And I'm bringing it down to the case of one individual here, just for simplifying, even at the risk of oversimplifying. And then there is, what am I willing to survive for? What is it that once I have survived, what is it that I'm surviving for? And it would be pleasure. It would be pleasure in terms of music and things like that, asking questions. And all the great revolutions and all the great answers that we have today collectively are because of seemingly nonsensical questions that have had nothing to do with our survival. So why we will ask, because it's human to ask. We will ponder them.
But obviously, look, all I'm saying, I disagree to a degree in the sense that I think that it is okay for us to say, look, we don't know where it began, and we don't know where it's going. I think that, to me, I'm going to say that's the most philosophically, that's the rational stance. And when I say that there are real questions before us, yes, of course, that includes existential questions, of course. But my point is that we already have enough to philosophize about right in front of us, including, yes, again, how am I an authentic person? How do I live a life that's worthwhile and happy and fulfilling? And how do I elevate myself? And how do I elevate others? Right. That includes that's part of the philosophical point I'm making, which is that. So I'm responding to the theist that says, okay, we have to know this emergent intelligence and we have to worship it. And we have to sort of come up with stories about it. And I'm like, I don't understand why. Quite frankly, I don't understand why people waste their time with that. It doesn't really get even at questions of authenticity. And so instead, my point is we have to. My point is that we need to look at the world and the ontology we live in: morality, justice, fairness, kindness. Yes, what's authenticity? And so, but again, the point is that there is. It's irrational to say there's only matter and energy, right? Just like it's irrational to say there's theism, there's divinity. And so that's my whole point. I'm saying I'm arguing for not really a middle of the road, but I'm arguing for a metaphysics that acknowledges the coherency of the universe that cannot be accounted for by matter and energy, but one at the same time that says, look, there's no reason whatsoever to worship this thing or to pray or to make sacrifices. That's just, again, it's just profoundly irrational. It's contrary to our very understanding of reality as we confront it, right? So, I think we should be beyond the age of worship. In other words, we need to move. So sometimes in science fiction, people will speak in that way. We need to be beyond the age of worship, right? Which is we see something amazing, we see something miraculous. What's the point of worshiping that? What's the point? What's the point of thinking that, there's we're seeing some face of some God? Again, that's self-defeating. Broadly speaking, that's what I'm submitting to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I haven't seen your email yet, but that's okay. You don't have, whatever. You take your time.
I will. Yeah, I've not even looked at the chat yet. So
okay, all right, thank you.
When we're
Thank
getting closer to the end, I will put it in the chat and I will put it in the meetup group comment. So
okay.
the people,
Thank you, sister.
even if they've exited the chat, they can still see it there later.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Angelina, it's your turn.
Yes, I must apologize to the speaker, Usha, in advance because I missed your talk and actually I have to begin work myself in 5 minutes. And this comment I have is not directed to the speaker. It's directed to something in the chat and somebody else told me to be more specific with my comments. So just to answer a comment before, I really think if you don't know about something, and maybe this goes back to cognitive reasoning, perhaps you shouldn't have an opinion on something if you know nothing about it. For example, it's nice to think that 9/11 and the attack of 9/11 began just out of the blue with some Islamic terrorists. Let's go back to the Mujahideen in the 1980s and who sponsored them against the Soviets in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at the petrodollars, or what we call in the region, by the way, petro-Islam. Who put the Wahhabists and these ultra-conservatives in power in the region that have terrorized us in the region? And by the way, terrorized millions of Muslims. So it's just, I find it absolutely heinous that somebody with zero knowledge and who talks with this newspeak headline manner would even dare to think that they really can explain what's happening in Lebanon or Jordan or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. And may I add something to that about the Christians in the region? Yeah, of course, the Christians have been persecuted. Actually, ISIS have killed more Muslims in Iraq and Syria than other minorities. And I say that myself, coming from a minority background in the region. I'm not here to excuse or exonerate Islam, but we also have to look at the rise of terrorism and in connection with what? Okay, from the 1970s onwards, we see a complete and utter, somebody mentioned dictatorship before, a spiritual dictatorship when it comes to Islam. In fact, if you read Arabic thinkers, Arabic-speaking thinkers, not all of them are Arabs, from the 12th or 13th century, I can give you names. These people were much more open to the culture of tafsir or the culture of interpretation than what we have now. So I just find it absolutely ridiculous that somebody would choose to write what they've written with just zero knowledge and zero understanding of what is actually happening. And also, by the way, if people in the chat are going to write about how their culture is somehow invaded by these foreigners, yeah, but you know what? Foreigners have also been invaded by these great Anglo-Saxons and whatnot. So, and also have put in all their puppets in power to terrorize us all here. And now, yes, they've come back to the West to terrorize you guys. Well, some people in the region, by the way, have no sympathy for you guys, given the fact that you helped create these monsters here in the region. So really, I think people need to look in their own backyard and also really understand the depth of a very vast, I mean, when you also talk about, I mean, Sunni Islam, Shia Islam, there are many more Islams than that, actually. I mean, I just find this absolutely ridiculous that somebody would give these weird generalized overtures, knowing nothing. I mean, even within Islam itself, if we talk about just Sunni Islam, you have four different schools of jurisprudence. One, by the way, where homosexuality is completely okay. And again, if we talk about Islam, for example, in Iraq, they're much more accepting of different Islamic minorities, than say, let's say Jordan, where I live now, for example. And also the Christians of Lebanon. My God, the Christians of Lebanon are the same fucked up mafia as the Muslims of Lebanon. And by the way, they're also intermatched. Somebody mentioned before in the chat something else about, some other terrorists, Hamas or something. I mean, Hamas was also on the bankroll of the Zionists. I mean, this is open knowledge by the Mossad, by the way. Who also, if people don't know about the, what is it called, the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, that was a blatant, when Iran, Israel, and Hezbollah were actually all in cahoots with one another vis-a-vis the US. I mean, this is all open knowledge. I mean, if you don't know about it, fine. But don't spurt your ignorance in such a group. I just find it intellectually so offensive. Not even culturally. Forget about culture. There's zero culture. Just intellectually. It's disgusting that somebody would write such things. Just from complete, for me, that level of ignorance is the same as some father fucking Wahhabist ignorance that we have to deal with in the region. Thank you. And I hope that was specific enough for somebody else in the comments.
Thanks, Angelina. I'm not following what's going on in the comments at all, but but I just briefly saw something pop up. When did this go into a theological discussion from philosophy of science? Whatever, I'll take a look at the chat later. But in the scientific frame of thinking, I'll just make one comment here that there is a lot more that we need to look at before we, I don't know what exactly the comments were, but this is just a brief response to, not just aside from Angelina, and we can move on to other things. Taliban was an organization by and large created by the Americans to kick the Russian forces out. So whatever happens, history is, again, it's a very complicated thing with many, many interconnected forces and unseen to the public connections that, we don't know everything about. So that's, I mean, I don't know what exactly was the conversation about, but this is how I do try to look at these things. It wasn't, at least the 9/11, we know enough that it wasn't a random one-off thing that just someone cooked up off the top of their head one day and decided that we're going to blow these American World Towers. There's a historical background to it. There's a reason why some things have happened. And then there's a whole heap of other discussion that we can certainly have around it. And we should have discussions, alternative. And that is the scientific way, I would argue, is like, where are we coming from? This is using the exact same method to another discourse, and it would be good for everyone to have that open conversation. And yeah, I certainly don't know all the intricacies of the Middle Eastern region. Heck, I don't know all the intricacies of my own life as well as I would like to. But then, yes, we need, I would just say to that is, we need to extend that same critical thinking to every dimension, which is why I said critical thinking is a framework that we use in all our discourses. Science happens to be one of them that uses it. So yeah, well, that's all I have to say about it. Who's next?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Stephen.
Steve. Yeah.
Stephen, go ahead.
I found it interesting, Usha, that you brought up the question of superstition. In some places, they still believe in the evil eye. I had certain small moments of superstition when I was a kid, and these days I'm just too dry to be superstitious. So it's not actually that I'm rationally against superstition. It just seems to be an emotion. I'm just way too dry now to care. But one of the stories we got told by the rationalists was that, pre-Enlightenment, that you'd get these sort of panics, and they would need to find somebody to blame for the bad effects that were going on. And so they'd single out some poor victim and persecute them and call them witches or something like that. But when I investigated the actual history of a lot of witchcraft trials and that, they were all in the game. The people they were persecuting actually did believe that they had the evil eye and would affect fear in other people. Maybe they were seeking revenge, but this was commonly the thing. The whole community believed in sorcery or the evil eye, and they weren't just picking on random people. It was actually people who were trying to use the idea of sorcery as a weapon. But it's so interesting that we're actually told a different story by the rational Enlightenment. But the case is very different. So, I don't know if you'd understand what I mean, that when you go to a community, where everybody has a bit of a belief in sorcery or the evil eye. That's a common belief. Both the person who projects the evil eye and the person who believes themselves a victim, they both believe in it. I wonder if that makes sense to you, Usha.
Yes, which is where, again, I come back to science or whatever is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening in the context of history, in the context of culture, done by human beings who are fallible. And we are trying to come up with the most rigorous way that we can to provide an explanatory framework and then potentially extract some good out of it for our own benefit and extending the notion of what our good is. And so all those things. Yeah. So for any idea to take root, you need a share. For any idea to take root, to go back to your example, you need a shared belief system for that. It's not going to work otherwise, right? So
I was just going to say that, well, although we've supposedly left the age of superstition behind us, the thing is the human being themselves, even the most rational, will have an element of superstition within them that's always willing to break out again.
Yeah, then again, my argument there is that to the extent that it is harmless, in the face of the unknown, human beings reach out to the best stories that can give us some forward momentum when faced with the unknown. That is human. That is just being human. So while we do all the other things in a rational-ish kind of a way, we will reach out. We speak with the person who offers us most comfort or we try to. We hope that there are people like that in our lives. Not necessarily because they're going to do anything to remedy the situation for me, but then it's going to give me the comfort blanket I need, or I give them the comfort. When someone is grieving, the most important thing we can do is just show up and shut up. You don't give them a lecture on how to solve their grief. We allow them to be human. You just be with them, right? So these doesn't mean these are not rational. These are all survival needs and so all of them predate formal logic in that way. It's not that they're irrational. It's just that they are not superstitions. We need them. We have them all the time with us. So where does it matter? Again, in that earlier example, is being aware of it and knowing where to put a stop to it. I will still be, this is just an extra. When my now daughter has grown up and she can tell me what she wants or what's going on. When she was a baby, and she's just wailing, and I'm a new mother. I don't know what the hell is going on. Right? So while I'm giving her a Nurofen and while I'm treating her, if my grandmother or someone is going to tell me, can you please do this as well? I am going to believe it and do it. And I have done it. Even now I do it sometimes when my mom or someone says, just do this. She's had a day of complete visibility. Everyone has been seeing her in this beautiful dress. Not everyone's got a good eye. Just take the evil eye out of her just to keep peace at home. Sometimes I do it. I see nothing wrong in the practices, provided we know where they're coming from and why we're using it. If I'm using it as a self-soothing ritual, the same as I would with a cup of tea or a glass of wine, perfectly good. Dissing the practices for knowing for what they are, simply because I have an alternative explanation for it with no respect for that, that's not something. An explanation of why the male rain approaches and the female rain approaches and the differences it causes to the psyche of a Navajo person of a Dene origin. It's not going to survive an empirical framework. Doesn't mean it is wrong. It works in that culture. It has helped them survive however long they have. So that can exist and they can still get their vaccinations. Neither of them need to go away, but using that approach so there's a connotation and there's a denotation. Knowing what is what's important here. Anyway, that's the long answer to that. Who's next?
Jonathan, go ahead.
I suppose if we're going to go back to the talk, or at least trying to, the opposite of the view you're advocating for, I think the closest opposite I can think of would be something like some form of epistemological particularism, the view that we cannot make generalities about knowledge or the world around us, either because the person in question believes that ontologically there's no such thing as generalities, and the particulars only give an illusion of such, and they're just clusters of similarities, or they're of the opinion that any method that tries to do so will end up failing in some manner, and thereby they're not true generalities, and they're best construed as general to the extent where it works and ceases to be general outside of that. So it's kind of like a limited general notion of how those kind of works. Or they would just make the claim that those generalities are an illusion entirely, whichever. If we're going to steel man this position, they would basically say something to the effect of the scientific method as it stands is not even good enough to do complete general work for the natural world around us. Or in other words, they might make the statement that true scientific progress does not make the assumption that general laws exist. It doesn't even rely on a singular method. It relies on as many methods that work as possible, and figuring out what works and what doesn't work is entirely an endeavor that a person has to figure out on their own through a lot of improvisation and a lot of rigor. And that cannot be in any way, shape, or form formalized. And that's the best alternative I can find within the past few minutes. What do you think? What do you think of this alternative I found?
To an extent, yes, I do agree. But what I would just push it a little bit, and this is a deeper argument, so I'm just trying to wing it off my head. I'd really need to think deeper about it. But I would perhaps say that we're not attempting towards universality. I think what we can get away with is a fair ground of generality, but I wouldn't say that you can get a universal explanation that's going to, or a universal paradigm, particularly as you get closer to human enterprises and human lives and cultures and other things. If you're going to apply those principles, you could get a generalization that's going to work for the most part, but what you are not going to get perhaps is your universal version. And I think we can live with that. I mean, I'd frankly be able to live with that. Why must there be one? We don't need one ring to rule them all. The whole enterprise of the Lord of the Rings was to destroy that one ring. So I'm happy with multiple generalizations, and then kind of also knowing in what orders of perception, what order of living do they work, and where they need amending. So there's no single one universal explanation or answer. And I'm good with that. I think that's where I would be tending to. And I'm just saying this off the top of my head without having given it too much of a thought. But yeah.
All right. That's fair.
Would
you say that would you say that the past convos, how far away from the topic were they, and to what extent do they intersect?
I think the one that on the face of it looks as far away from the topic is perhaps when we would discuss, when there was, I haven't seen the chats, but some of the conversation around the Middle East and the positions about making assumptions about how things are and stuff. On the face of it, yes, it's hard to have that kind of argument when we're looking at something else altogether here. But as I tried to respond to I think it was Angelina, in that one, we got to put in the same critical thinking rigor into understanding a complex situation and not make blanket statements, because in that example of one of the examples of Twin Towers and the 9/11 attack, it didn't happen on a whim. There's a lot of history to it. We cannot discount the American role in global politics. I won't say, I mean, there's so much more to it than a blanket statement which says that this is what caused this, and therefore they were right to go and attack. And in fact, in initial attack, they attacked the wrong country. So there's a lot of debate that can be there. So on the face of it, yes, but then it would be an interesting exercise to see if we can put the same critical thinking apparatus that is done in the scientific machinery into investigating. And that is the problem that I find. You stop using the machinery when it starts getting difficult, because then you probably don't want to see the answers, because then you're going to have to challenge your first assumptions about how things work. So if anything, I would like a good discussion, but not just based off how I feel about one thing or the other, but use a critical thinking lens and analyze maybe one example and open up that discourse and then discuss it. Yeah, it would have been a great example. But yeah, I think a little bit weird off. But hey, look, we've been doing these talks for so long that kind of Les is smiling. These things happen.
Robert, it's your turn.
Thank you, David. This is not a comment or a question. Just wanting to draw your attention to a couple of books which have had a huge impact on how I see what's going on in the world at the moment.
Yes.
One of them is this thing by Chris Mooney called In War on Science. There was a discussion a little earlier about the issue of whether science is going to be demolished and cease to be part of the way we see the world. This is a discussion in considerable depth of how the Republican Party in the USA is very seriously attacking the basis of the American civilization, which is deeply involved in the scientific process. A great deal of it is about something called the Data Quality Act. It was written at a time when the ozone hole issue was sort of very much on the peak of everyone's consciousness. And what it's saying is no government policy should be based upon any science in which the probability of something is less than 1. In other words, science is not probabilistic. Everything has to be perfect. Otherwise, you ignore it as rubbish. And that's just really seriously dangerous stuff. In your progression from Popper through Kuhn to Feyerabend, you didn't mention this guy, whom I found very, very useful, Philip Pullman. Wonderful book on the philosophy of science, which is about the significance of scientific theory as an extreme generalization of the way the whole universe works. And I just found it really brilliant. I'm not a scientist, so as an outsider, it just helped me come to an understanding of how science works in a way that nothing I had read beforehand had ever done. So it was just brilliant. So anyway, I just want to draw your attention to that. That's all.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for a very humane discussion for the whole evening. You've kept you cool wonderfully.
Thanks. No, everyone's been good. It's just divergent range of topics and interests that we have. And yeah, to the point, I've left out nearly everything. I mean, every slide can be a 2 to 3 hour talk. There's so much to cover, right? There's so many great writers. There's definitely, at some point look at Douglas Hofstadter, and there's a reason the emergent consciousness and all those things. I've not looked at Dan Dennett. Okay, yes, I love you too. Sorry, my dog has been away from me for 4 hours and she wants my attention. Yes. So I'm just telling her that I love her.
Yeah, Gödel Escher Bach is just a wonderful book.
Yeah, it's
really hard to digest.
Very difficult. And then there's Margaret Bowden's Mind as Machine 2-part series. kind of entirely predicated on, the artificial general intelligence that we're just touching the tip off today. Oh, there's so much, but yeah, I mean, I just tried to give a very, very high overview in this. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always good with Robert Bender because he keeps up with, all the books on the controversial issues. And he might be interested to know that today when I was listening to Trump's talk, I don't know where it was at, but he went on for about an hour. I listened to some of it and it was very interesting. He simply said the USA was constitutionally under God. Then he said that God created us all. And I was interested that there's a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod in America, that had a convention in Florida just a few years ago, and they raised the issue of natural over against supernatural. And they actually made a motion that they would not use the concept of natural, but they had to use the concept of supernatural, which of course suited the Bible with all its supernatural miracles and things like that, but it's left them with the situation now where they're full of creationists and flood geologists and all this sort of thing, which is really messing up it's messed up lots of the churches, Southern Baptists and other fundamentalists over in America, and not a happy picture. Anyway, it looks like there's a lot of people over there that do support Trump, and Trump's jumping on the religious bandwagon and giving them plenty of God. Now, I am responding to Angelina because I've been talking about the Muslims and I think she had a bit of a go at me. Firstly, Usha, I appreciate that you're seeking the whole picture, and all issues involved when you're dealing with such a controversial and widespread issue as Islam, especially in the past and today. And so I appreciate that you make that point that we need to look at the whole picture where we can. Now, I haven't made any comments actually in the comment chat, but my interest in Islam is that while I was doing my Middle Eastern Studies degree, Bachelor of Arts at Melbourne University, we had Islamic lectures, obviously. Dr. Mercer was one, I recall, and he tried to give us an overall picture of things, which was very good. And I still think that looking at Islam in the terms of the Triple M, where there are the mild Sufis, the dervishes, those people that are conducting a spiritual jihad, the moderates who want a way of living, and also then you've got the third category, the militants. They're there, and so it's no use trying to say that they don't. Now, they're generalizations. Obviously, there's lots of qualifications within each of those, but I think that they are the three main categories that you deal with when you mention Islam. And of course, with the militants, our problem in Australia, the big issue is the Bondi Beach killers there killed the Jews. They were apparently inspired by ISIS. Apparently, they've got some literature from them. So there is that problem, and our security is very much stretched, especially ASIO. They're complaining that they're expected to keep under observation 5,000 Islamic persons in a quest to keep track of what they're doing. Well, that's what a waste of time and energy when there's so many crimes going on around the place and corruption and all that sort of thing and smuggling. And all these people have to be followed around to prevent them from getting into trouble or creating trouble. So obviously, on an official level, Islamic decrees do prohibit any criticism of the content of the Quran. That's the problem. You can't offer any criticism. And they still insist that the whole world belongs to Allah. So no other religions really have a right to make any claim like that.
I took her on a walk and I fed her.
And that's not good news for other religions, obviously. So the more information we have about all these sort of things, I think, is better for us. And it's good, Usha, that you have given encouraged us to adopt a wider view rather than just focus on some particular aspects. Anyway, I suppose in a way it was a bit of a response to Angelina, but she may not have been referring to me at all. So anyway, that's just my comment.
Quite all right. These discussions do tend to go in multiple directions, and as long as we're taking it into account and responding to each other, I think that's kind of the point of having such open discourses, not to shy away from difficult conversations, at least on human terms. I think that's, otherwise, we're just talking in the air.
Well, I think another factor is that it's good that David has a system of waiting till you've got your microphone back on again. That avoids this business in some Zoom sessions where people just shout at each other to try to shout over each other, and in the end you don't hear anything except you just see two angry people with increasingly red faces trying to demolish some other person.
David's been at it for a long time.
David's program here, his Zoom, is very well run, and I congratulate him. I haven't seen a Zoom that is as good as this. Thanks, David.
Well, thanks, John. Karim, your turn.
Thanks. I wanted to ask Usha about her perspective on a couple of stubborn problems in the philosophy of science that are thought at least by scientific anti-realists, to bring the entire enterprise into doubt epistemically. The first, of course, is the problem of induction. All scientific laws and much of the generalization of scientific experimental results rely on inductive reasoning.
Yep.
Inductive reasoning is essentially the practice of inferring unobserved cases from observed cases. So the classic example, of course, is we've seen the sun rise every day of our lives, and we therefore judge that it will rise tomorrow.
Yep.
But of course, that cannot be justified deductively. No logical argument guarantees that past regularities must continue. And it can't be justified inductively either without circularity. And yet scientific inductive reasoning produces remarkable results in terms of predictive value of scientific models.
Yep.
The other problem I wanted to raise, which is I think even more troublesome, is the problem that structural realists raise. They note that many scientific models, if not most, if not all, contain false premises that are required for the model to make good predictions, or predictions that are faithful. Let me say that again for the rest of the people here. Scientific models usually require falsehoods to make good predictions. Without the falsehood, the model doesn't make a good prediction, which raises the question, why would false models, first of all, make good predictions? And secondly, why would we regard false models as representing a scientific realist view that the model represents nature and is true to nature? One example is, famous example is Bohr's model of the atom. It assumes that electrons orbit the nucleus like planets. And it also imposes quantization really by fiat. Both claims are false. yet the model predicts hydrogen spectral lines almost perfectly. Classical thermodynamics uses reversible and quasi-static processes that never occur in nature. Yet these idealizations, while false, derive correct macroscopic predictions. And there's lots and lots of other examples.
Yeah.
So I wanted your, if you didn't, your thoughts about these in terms of the epistemic legitimacy of the scientific enterprise.
Right. Thanks for that. I'll answer the second one first because it's just slightly easier in some ways. Why do we still, in fact, whether it's with the problem of induction or with using stochastic models and the ones with false assumptions or even false data fit into it so that it can work. The reason we still go back to them is because they do work. That's really why. It's the outcome that justifies the use of a particular framework. We see that it's working. It's got predictability. It's got rigor in it in terms of its predictive value. And so we go back to it. Now, why do they work is a big philosophical question. I don't know why they work, but then I guess partly what the scientists do with such things is accept the fact that there are some unknown factors, unknown quantities. Even for example, I'll give you something slightly different, but just to the use of constants. So even if we have something, the inverse proportion laws, so whether it's gravity or whether it's electricity or whatever, we've still got the inverse proportionality, and then you've got a K in there. And then you derive a constant from it, right? That constant is not present in nature. You've put it in there so that you can have a particular equation that can explain certain observed phenomenon. They're there for that purpose. And because there is no reason from life as to why the hell that should work. But with the mathematical rigor, it seems to have fixed some assumption bases and other things that can help us derive these particular outcomes, which is why, again, going back to it, there's a lot of, in the scientific practice, we do play around a fair bit. It's not that we've got a set of absolute certainties that we can work around with. Whether it's, and Karl Popper's, the problem of induction is there. I mean, it's a known problem in science. I mean, we are basing our patterns and predictions, but the reason it is there is that we're not working in a deterministic model over here. The ultimate model that we've got here is what used to be pure probabilistic, and more so we see that it's Bayesian probabilistic. So we're looking at conditional probabilities. So given this to be the case, what is does it have the highest likelihood of occurring? If you introduce this condition, what does it do to the likelihood of some event occurring? So when we say the sun, well, I just saw briefly somewhere that the sun actually doesn't rise. The sun is where it is. It's the illusion of rising and setting because of the movement of the earth around the sun. Yeah, yes, that's true. But leaving the language part of it aside, we go with because the highest probability of this happening tomorrow, given this model and given this observable data, is near close to certainty. So we are working with near close to certainty. And so we bring in some assumptions that will keep the outcome near close to certainty as possible. And then we work through it from there. And so far, whether it's Planck's constant, whether you've got Avogadro's number, we've got all these things. They're magic numbers introduced by us in many ways, but they have also been arrived at with a lot of care. So it's not that any number goes in over there. So I think it's the long form of answer is why do we still use them? It's because of their validity in predicting the right outcomes, as you said too. the self-correction mechanism we have there is when it doesn't work, then you better find another way to explain the evidence rather than explain away the evidence. But then one anomalous evidence will also not take down the entire paradigm. You will need repetitive evidence that this is not an off chance that something like this is happening, and then we need to work out, okay, how many times is it happening? Where is it going wrong? Do we need to change the model, or do we need to change the observation mechanism? Is there a bias in there? So while on the surface, they are the best approximations available. That's what I would say. We're not looking at absolutes here. That's the reason why we still go by and large towards, that's why it works, whether it's the inductive logic or whether it's using stochastic mechanisms.
So just quickly,
Yeah.
So I think we share that position then. So it sounds like you're a scientific anti-realist, and to the extent that science for you, its validity it's in its predictive power, but its predictive power need not suggest that its models correspond with reality.
What is it predicting exactly? Is it predicting the outcome that is, so the outcome that we're looking for is not outside of reality. The means that we are looking to get and understand that outcome, that's where we're messing it up a bit, with the constants and other things. So if I say that, what is the reality that we're actually measuring when we say that the sun is rising? We're essentially actually saying that the positions of the earth and the sun haven't changed. They're still moving the way they used to move the previous day. That's the reality that you're actually getting to. But for experiential purposes, we just say that, yes, the sun rises here again tomorrow. So I'm not sure I'm an anti-realist. I'm just the outcomes levels of outcomes. What is the level at which we're talking about? And then you go deeper, and then it's like, if I'm going farther away from that, then what is it? So there's I'm not saying that there's a hierarchy here, but there's certainly different kinds of outcomes that you're looking at. So within those examples that you gave, then whether it's the inductive power or whether we're using certain constants, so we can come up with, which is the problem actually, which we haven't solved, which is the string theory thing. We've got a terrific model, but there is no way for us, at least at the moment, to measure its validity. It holds very good as a theory. It can explain a lot of factors about the universe and how things have come to be. They've come to be, but there's absolutely no way for us to measure it. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that we haven't found a way to translate what is in theory to what can actually be experimentally verified. There was a brief, hope from a few years ago when there was cosmic inflation. Susskind, I just saw this, but yeah, there's loop quantum gravity versus string theory. Some people like their universe quantum-y, some people like it stringy. We don't know. We don't know exactly. So yes, to a certain degree, yes, the predictive power of the outcomes, but also what kind of outcome it is that we're looking at. The closer to reality, the better the outcome is, the more consistent it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kareem.
Usha, a few months ago, you mentioned that you were hoping that today's session would help kickstart the Philosophers Bazaar meetup group. Is that still your intention to?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been, so many other things have been happening. It's kind of gone into the background. So, Akiva isn't here, but then I'm going to chat up with him this week. And we're going to get the sessions started going again, so we'll start having more talks.
Yes, well, perhaps you'll give your talks to the Philosophers Bazaar, but nevertheless, you're still quite welcome to present them here.
Philosophers Bazaar is a platform, just as this is one. I'm very happy to give a talk, whether it's here or there. I'm happy to give a talk here, and then we'll promote it in the bazaar as always, or I give a talk there, and then we associate ourselves with you. Hey, it's the group and the conversations that matter. I really don't care.
Yes, yes, very good.
But thanks, good that I'm welcome again.
Philip, it's your turn.
I'm sorry. You're an anti-scientific realist or anti-realist? Are you an instrumentalist or are you a scientific realist? Or are you a mathematical?
I haven't thought of myself in any of those terms. I'm sorry. I'm trying to wing an answer, but I haven't got a label for myself as to what exactly it is that I am. I don't have an answer. Sorry.
I see. So suppose you're a realist.
Yeah.
I mean, the naive picture would be to look at the world as atoms in a void. Because I think that what our science tells us is that, space-time is a four-dimensional manifold, locally Minkowskian. There's Hilbert spaces, there's wave functions, and then there are operators. And that the fact that we can make predictions and that our theories have good predictive successes commits us to at least entertain the truthiness of the premises of our best theories. So our best theories are a set of statements, and those statements reference Hilbert spaces, wave functions, operators, and that by saying that they are true and allow us to make good predictions of how the world works, I think we are to ontologically committed to the existence of those objects as real. And if they are real, then reality is not atoms in a void. It is wave functions, Hilbert spaces, four-dimensional manifold. They are not a construct. They are actually things that are out there. So yeah, there you go. What's your view of taking mathematical objects such as the ones I listed seriously?
Yeah, it's a serious answer. I wouldn't know. So I'll tell you what, because of the examples that you've mentioned, well, I do know of these things to a certain degree, simply because of the study, but I'm not a theoretical physicist and I don't know all there is to know. But just from a philosophy of science perspective, I would say that this is just my personal thing. I don't know exactly which way to turn and say that this is the way or this is the only way. So whether it's Hilbert spaces, four-dimensional manifold, all of those things, yes, they're objects and there's explanatory frameworks for that, and that's good. And if that's working, then that's fine. But if there is an alternative where you need a mathematical model to be able to explain certain phenomenon, but then there may not be exact, objects in space correlate to it, but it still explains it consistently, certain phenomenon, then I'm good to go with that too. So these are things that I don't know very much about, Philip. So
okay.
Yeah,
So
from the physics perspective is what I'm saying. So, but just from a philosophy perspective is what I was saying, that I don't know. I haven't thought about where my positioning is in one way or the other. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So you don't have a theory. You don't have a philosophy of science theory.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I wish I did.
What is your thesis?
My doctoral thesis?
Yeah. What exactly are you trying to claim, or what?
I'm not trying to claim anything here. This whole talk was, the only thing I was trying to do was, hey, that there is all these things, that science as an enterprise is not a sanctimonious or a sacred of that kind where, anything that scientists say goes. And it is also not, well, there is a fair bit of mystery as with anything, but it is not impervious to rational and critical thinking. So those were the points about it. And I took a slightly historical view to it.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So I wasn't making, this wasn't a talk on the philosophy of science in as a scientist would. It was for.
Yeah. Are you?
Yes.
Do you know, since you're philosophy of neuroscience, you must know Kim's problem, the exclusion principle, and the best anti-reductionist physicalist response, such as the difference-making principle. Can you elaborate on that?
I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, but
okay.
Yes.
Oh, you don't. Okay.
I don't practice philosophy of neuroscience, but yes, I can always find out, read up about it, and then tell you. Based on all my training, I can always certainly read up and understand and tell you what my take is on that. I'm happy to do that in the group chat.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Thanks. Oh, so good to know there's so much that I don't know. It'll keep me occupied for the next few weeks.
For Philip's benefit, I label myself as an indirect realist, which means that rather than being directly aware of outer reality, I'm only directly aware of my sense data, of my sensations. And of course, science is an extension, a means of extending our sense data. So that's, although because of that, I get accused of being an anti-realist. But anyway, Rick, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Usha. Thanks for the talk. I mean, pretty much what Usha went through today was basically Chalmers' book on what is science. Look, not everybody's aware of how science is delineated from something that's not science, so it's a legitimate subject, and it sort of provides a little bit of grounding. But look, I mean, when you're operating on, I've listened to talks between Lisa Moreland and Susskind and Leonard Susskind, and he's from Stanford, as you probably know. Well, actually, I think they're both from Stanford, and they had big bitch fights about some, the anthropic principle and these sorts of things, and nobody knows. And in a sense, look, the field's open. There's an opportunity for any of us to come up with a new idea that brings humanity forward, and to get that credit for, down throughout history. So look, that's a great thing. There's portals. You've got archive, which you have to be a PhD or somebody approved by a PhD to get access to, or you've got Vixra, which anybody can post on. From there, you can become famous. If you're the first one to produce this idea, you post it on Vixra. Look, you've got the first mover advantage. You can claim then that you invented something. If you can if it verifies that you're the first person, and that's a great thing. Other arguments. I think at the moment, Susskind seems to be getting into fights with a lot of people. But look, I don't know enough about the field, about that subject matter, to be able to say, is Susskind right or is Susskind wrong? Maybe he's just a bit arrogant, maybe not. Look, I'm willing to hold, and that's like I think Usha's been saying, that's part of the wonderful thing about the cut and thrust of ideas is, look, you can win an argument, but later on you can realize, hey, I wasn't actually right there. Even though I won the argument, I'm not actually right. So, and only time will tell. So yeah, it's sort of interesting, and you can sort of say you can sort of plead the Socrates defense a lot of the time, which says that I know I'm wiser than everybody else because I know I don't know. So it's a bit of a cop out, but it sort of works. I agree with Philip. The universe is mathematical. I think that ultimately the universe is mathematical, and contradictions in the universe will weed themselves out. They will basically cause any universes that are contradictory to not exist, which is sort of why if you do research into things like higher dimensional maths, this sort of thing, you do, and things like if you know about complex numbers, you've got things called quaternaries and octernaries, and these sorts of things, which are higher dimensional complex numbers. That's probably the best way to describe them. But you find that, just loosely speaking, higher dimensional spaces, like four-dimensional space, five-dimensional space, like, so you might ask the question, why is space three-dimensional? Basically because it works. Because if you look at the mathematics at higher dimensional spaces, you find that there are elements of those multi-dimensional spaces which are not conducive to a sane universe, let's say. So there is a good reason for this. So even though the universe looks very, and it is very complex, it looks very human in a sense. So that's because we are human, it's a sort of the anthropic principle, the idea that the universe looks human because we live in it, and we wouldn't live in it if it didn't appear to be somewhat human. But yeah, I mentioned in the chat, there's about 5 principles in the universe that are important. So you got time space, you got space time, you got matter energy, you've got the observer. So a universe effectively has to have an observer, and there has to be consciousness. So, and when you look at these things through different lenses, say inflation theory, black hole theory, things that Lisa Molan says, that the universe is a black hole, and the physics inherent from the parent universe in the multiverse. You look at things like Roger Penrose talks about in The Emperor's New Mind, he talks about basically what George was talking about panpsychism. So he's saying that the universe is inherent. Consciousness is a property of the universe. But I imagine you being a neuroscience background, probably, I think a lot of scientists seem to believe that consciousness is emergent. But so yeah, look, nobody knows, and it's fun to investigate it, and you can ask some interesting questions, and you can say how one theory is contradictory in a certain way, but maybe consistent in another way. It sort of harkens back to the arguments between the relativists and the Newtonian physicists of the early 1900s. So they came up with all these sorts of paradoxes. You had the twins paradox and these sorts of things. I thought I as well struggled with who was it that said, anyway, define, and I wanted to say, can you actually define scientific anti-realist? So he actually did, to be fair, he actually did come up with a good a definition of anti-realist. And he said, I'm just paraphrasing, the abstraction is good because it predicts reality. My perception of what he said was that the abstraction is good because it predicts reality rather than because it's true in itself. So that's what an anti-realist would believe. So they believe that an abstraction is good because of the it's able to predict the outcome of an experiment. So that's this is sort of like the Aristotle's truth versus Plato's truth. So as the famous painting, Plato's pointing at the sky, pointing to abstract truth, saying that's the truth, and Aristotle's pointing at the earth, saying no, experience and experimentation is the truth. And it seems that he's trying to he's probably coming up with an argument which is probably a standard objection to experimentalism. So pretty much these are standard arguments that experimentalists and abstractionists throw at each other from time to time. So in philosophy departments. So I don't think this is a unique argument, but I think it's probably helpful to probably understand the field of knowledge, and what the classic arguments against experimentalism versus abstractionism, Because in different cases, I mean, Plato believed in his theory of forms, which was basically a belief in abstractionism. So anyway, yeah. Quantum loop gravity. When I actually took an article on quantum loop gravity and I plugged it into AI and I said, yeah, please explain this to me. And it actually sounds pretty reasonable. I actually think it may actually be superior to string theory. I think it's a variation on string theory in a sense, but I don't like the name. I think, loopy, it's just like calling somebody a Fruit Loop, right? It's got a bad name from the start, that people aren't
I didn't come
like.
up with it. I actually heard the characterization in a Big Bang Theory episode.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's nice. He's actually not just making a point, but he's also taking a dig at the entire theorist.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a political thing. Yeah. I mean, I mean, other people have talked about membrane theory, which is supposed to be
the brain
a
theory.
variation on string theory.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just when I read that article, because I had to sometimes when you put things to AI, you might have to say. So you put the article to AI and it explains it, and then you say, yeah, I still don't understand. So sometimes you have to do this a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times, before you can start to understand, asking intelligent questions before you can sort of get a handle on actually what they're talking about. But
yeah,
it did sound more reasonable than string theory in a sense. So I wouldn't completely negate the idea of loop quantum gravity, but it is very similar in some ways to string theory. And all of these things are sort of relate back to the standard model. So yeah.
I
Anyway.
think I've heard that loop quantum gravity comes up. Bell's inequality. Yes, someday. Not today. Erica, I would love to get into Bell's inequality and those discussions today. 4 hours later, I'm still standing. I'm sure I don't want to go into it in this session.
Yes. Yes, we have reached our time to finish.
Yeah.
So many thanks, Usha, for your presentation and for being in the hot seat for 4 whole hours.
Thank you. That's why I've been standing. My butt would be scalded if I was sitting down. So I've been standing these 4 hours. So
really, gee. Oh well, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I mean, it's been